so long, Al.
Minutes.
This is our second time trying to start this episode. We had a little bit of technical difficulties. So
Hiccup, little spooks, maybe a
Yeah.
little ghost saying it's almost the holidays.
Yeah, saying that we've always been the caretakers here.
Yeah.
But
Maybe. We don't know how old this building is.
that's a good point, actually.
In Santa Fe?
It does have like a storied history. It used to be an old school.
Oh,
and-
great. So
yeah.
ghost children are
Ghost
turning off the
children,
audio.
yeah.
Love it.
Hopefully some ghost twins, maybe.
Let's keep that to The Shining.
Well, so welcome to Splice and Splatter, the film podcast presented by the Jean Cocteau Cinema here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I lost my intro notes, so I'm just winging it here. I know that those are things that we are. Is there anything that I'm missing here, Al?
It's the podcast where classic horror meets modern gore.
Oh my
of
gosh,
course.
the most obvious thing.
With who? Your hosts.
I'm Siena.
I'm Al. I got it this time, baby.
You got it this time. This was totally my plan the entire time, just to get you to actually.
I was gonna say it's just my. I've been primed because I've been listening to you do the
There
intro
you
for the
go.
last few episodes.
Whereas I've just been blacking out and going to the white room every time I do the intro, so I have no idea what I'm saying. Perfect. All right. So we're talking about The Shining and Misery from 1980 and 1990 to snowy Colorado set Stephen King horror adaptations. I think two of kind of widely considered the best Stephen King adaptations.
I mean, they're pretty. I feel like most people they've seen a Stephen King adaptation.
It's gonna be one of
usually-
these two.
Yeah.
And both, for me, The Shining is a holiday tradition. I was telling you this is probably in contention for the film I've seen most of all time.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I watch it every Christmas. I do a little Shining gingerbread house. I also watch it like multiple times scattered throughout the rest of the year. I have dreams that are set in the Overlook Hotel. It has seeped into my unconscious. My notes are twice
makes
as long
so
as
much
they
sense.
usually. Just you wait.
This tracks.
I'm like, I don't even know where this conversation is going to go because, like, this film is such a deep part of me. I am such a deep part of this film that it could lead us anywhere.
Just one day I'm going to be watching this film and somehow just you're in it. Like The Ring, you're just in
Well, so one of the things that I noticed this time is how many times you see other hotel photographs, other black and white hotel photographs on the wall that we don't see close-ups on. So one of these days, you're going to pause it on one of those photographs. You're going to zoom in on the screen, and it's just going to be me.
We need to do, I don't know how to do that edit and green screen, but I want to do that for you one day. That's going to be a gift I'll be working on for next Christmas.
That
Just
I would
Photoshop
be
you in.
so honored. All right, can I start us off with a little Kubrick tidbit?
Yeah,
for you?
absolutely.
I found this one as I was waiting for you to get here today. While filming The Shining, which as we all know was an infamously terrible set to work on, which we're going to talk a little bit about that. I don't want to go into too much detail about that because I think there are other people who've done a better job of talking about it, and also because I think we're here to talk about the film.
Yes.
But something that gave me a little bit of joy to find out, given how terrible he was to Shelley Duvall, is that while filming The Shining, Kubrick got lost in his own maze.
Did he really?
He was worried that it's so satisfying. He was worried.
How long?
I don't know, but he was worried that the labyrinth was too easy. And so all of the crew members were like, "Okay, Stanley, we dare you.
Oh,
you
love that.
go
They
solve
knew.
the labyrinth."
Yeah,
then."
they're
And
like,
he
"We
got
made
lost in
this."
there.
Oh, what a butt
It's
face.
just the justice contained in that story. So
That's
satisfying.
amazing. I wish they had just, at that time, I wish they had GoPros so we could have just
Right?
seen his frustration as he walked through that.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that my notes on this are so extensive is because his daughter Vivian was on set during the filming of The Shining, which lasted for over a year. And so she was following her dad around with like I think either 8 or 16 mil camera filming the filming of The Shining.
Right.
And so there's a lot of kind of candid behind the scenes footage that you wouldn't normally get of somebody like Stanley.
Right, because it's someone really close to him. How old was she?
I think she was 16 or 17 at the
Wow.
time.
Oh, so she has that teen angst that she's ready to get back at her dad.
Oh yeah. So she it's kind of like really interesting, like reality TV before reality TV, because she catches like all of these moments of you know, Shelley Duvall in distress and Stanley like muttering to himself, walking in circles and like just horrors. Just horrors.
I was gonna say I've seen the horrors.
The horrors.
That's so funny.
My Brando moment. The
oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm never gonna see that maze differently now.
Isn't that great? Which
That's
like
so funny.
the maze actually isn't even in the original novel. In the novel, it's topiary animals that come to life.
Right.
But apparently it was mainly because special effects weren't really good enough to do animated topiary animals at the time. So
that would have been tough.
Which I think the labyrinth is so much creepier.
Well, so I feel like people. Well, I kind of see a little bit of both when you see like posters or people doing fan art of it. You see a little bit of both, but I feel like the maze is really what has stuck.
It's like a
people.
quintessential part of The Shining. Which, speaking of, have you seen Saltburn?
I've not seen it yet.
I know this is like the third time that I've asked you.
But it comes out the 22nd.
Yes,
on streaming.
So by the time you're listening to this, it'll be streaming. It's my new obsession. I think it's not like explicit horror, but for folks who listen to this podcast, I think it'll be up your alley. It is filled with Shining references, which is part of the reason.
See, I know nothing about it.
I'm going to give you a few little tidbits that don't spoil anything in it, but just things for you to watch
look out for.
Cool. One of them is obviously there is a labyrinth with a miniature labyrinth inside the house looking out over it. That's like clearly a Shining reference. The iconic carpet is recreated on the wall of one of the bedrooms if you watch really closely. There's these kind of sweeping long shots tracking through the interiors that are very much like the Steadicam. Bathtubs are very important. You'll know what I mean when you get there.
Oh yeah, I've heard there's a scene.
There is a scene. But so just a little tidbit for you for something that's currently in theaters that is in conversation with this.
Yeah, because I have been doing the new thing because I feel like some trailers give away too much for me nowadays.
And I think this trailer does give away more than
I haven't watched anything. So. I haven't watched anything. I've only seen people like reacting to like that bathtub scene and just like their face or like, don't go see this with your mom. So like that's literally, and then the facts you just gave me, it's all I know.
Cool. Watch out for
idea.
That carpet recreation.
Very cool.
There's like a ton of little things like that it's clearly like, oh, this is a horror fan who made this.
Idea that it again, I have no idea what what it's about. I'm just going in.
Stay that way.
Yeah,
Stay that way.
That's fun.
And I also found a little bit of Breaking Bad overlap, which I thought was fun for some New Mexico tidbit cred. So the Salamanca twins, who are axe murderers, were apparently kind of intended as references to the Grady twins, who were murdered by an axe. But also in the 2010 episode Sunset, the cops radio for help, and they use the address KDK12, which is the Overlook's address in The Shining.
That's fun.
Yeah, I think Vince Gilligan is the one who's like a big Shining fan and sort of put a few little Shining Easter eggs throughout Breaking Bad's run.
That's fun.
Yeah. Tell me about your viewing experience. Walk us through how you watched these films. How many times have you seen The Shining?
Gosh, how many times? I can't. So this is one of the films I can't remember the first time I saw it.
Oh,
you'd think
interesting.
that would be like a moment.
The weird thing is, I can remember the moment I saw the opening shot for the first time, and nothing else. Like after that point, it's so blurred in with my memory of all the other times that I've seen it that I can't remember
that distinct moment.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. It either was one of the films that my mom showed me and like had a Sunday afternoon where I was like, yes, this. Probably in the winter time, I'm sure she would have put it on. Or it must have been a college film school where it's like, you know, oh my God, you haven't seen The Shining. And, you know, and so you feel guilty and you run back. And
right.
At that time, I think it was Netflix, like the DVDs in the mail. R.I.P. They don't do that anymore.
Oh, the good old days. I remember those like crinkly paper packages that they always came in, and I kept being like, how do they not break in the mail?
Fair.
Yeah.
Point.
Right?
I had never thought about that. I have so many of those that I never returned.
Oh, as we all do. I mean, no wonder that part of the business model
Probably,
no longer exists.
But yeah, so it was one of those 2 times. I've seen it. Oh, I want to say I've seen it like 6 or 7 times, maybe over
a
the
good
course of life.
good handful of times.
A good handful of times. It's one of those films that it's like even if you haven't seen it, you kind of know.
It's so parodied.
Yeah, it's so parodied, so you kind of know the overview of it. But yeah, watched it last night. Did it back to back with Misery after coming home from Colorado.
Amazing.
I've now since actually this is the first time I've seen it since I actually saw the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. Didn't get to stay at it, but saw it in the distance. Went in that like stayed up there for a wedding. And so I got to kind of see that town and like see it like sits up a little bit higher, and there's definitely like this air of like ooh in the back, you know, as you look at it.
I'm so jealous.
I'm hoping to plan a trip there. But yeah, so coming back from Colorado, I was tired from the road trip, and so I just back to back it. But yeah, it was it's always fun to revisit that one because I just feel like, you know, the colors, the shots, the acting, Jack Nicholson's facial expressions and everything. He's so campy and like flamboyant,
but yet it's so real.
But terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, he is a terrifying
He's a
actor.
terrifying human.
But when he's younger, somehow his face was more putty than it is now. So just like the movements. So yeah, I'm surprised I didn't have weird dreams last night because I literally watched it, fell asleep.
Amazing. Did it scare you, or does it scare you?
Scared my dogs. My dogs did not like the scream. One of my dogs didn't like Shelley Duvall's scream.
Fair.
And the other did not like the little kid saying red rum.
That's so
They were like,
funny.
what the is this? Jack Nicholson scares me at the end. Just that whole scene going back up the staircase and she's walking backwards. That scene's just one of my favorite.
That's so brutal. For me, I still even after seeing it question mark times. I like still can't even calculate, but even after however many times I've seen it, the ending scene of Danny retracing his footsteps in the snow
So smart.
always gets my heart rate going, even though you know
well, you're like he could be coming up behind him. You're like, where is he in the maze? I think that's the thing too, is like an audience, you're just so confused at like where they are. How well does Danny know this maze?
Right.
Because he's like walked it with his mom. How many times have they done that?
And we've only seen him do it once.
Yeah.
So we really don't know
Yeah.
how capable he is of doing this.
Yeah.
So and especially because I was like a kid when I first saw it, so you like relate to Danny even more. That one in particular just still always gets me.
If you're in the snow, where are you going to go? Everyone's going to see your tracks. You can't hide in the snow.
There's no hiding. Yeah. But it's so brilliant, and it's so like I wouldn't think to do that in the moment.
Yeah.
Like I would like to think that I would, but I know I wouldn't.
Yeah. Oh my God. Wait, you just drew up a memory. I think I saw it when I was really young because I remember, or it was peripherally on because the red rum used to, like, I remember that part as a kid. I used to, oh my God, you just unlocked a door. Room 273, or was it 237?
237.
Yeah, because I remember I used to hear my parents watching the red rum scene and I used to leave the room.
Oh my God, I love
Stop
this.
it. Oh God.
So
sometimes my brain likes to unpack that stuff. Sometimes it's like, you know what?
You're not ready.
There's other things attached to that maybe you don't want. But yeah, so I think at least so like peripherally as a kid, I knew of it and heard it. Because I can like see myself sitting on the stairs as a kid and like being like, nope.
That like red rum.
Yeah. Ew, why are you so good? Too many times. You've seen it too many times.
Too many times.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a good watch every time.
Interesting. So. Oh, I'm glad that there's still some scare in it for you as well.
Yeah.
It's like it's still scary to me, but it's also become like a hangout movie for me because I've watched it so many times.
So you're like embedded in it a little bit where it feels comfort.
And it's such a rich world, which is something that people have kind of chewed over and been fascinated with since the movie was released because people have like mapped out the floor plan of the Overlook Hotel and gone, this isn't a physically possible space. There's like windows like in I think it's Ullman, the guy that Jack has the interview with at the beginning. In his office, you follow them into the interior of the hotel. There's no way it could have a window looking outside, but it does. And so there's like
they kind of loop back.
Yeah. And so there's little things like that where you're kind of like subliminally getting this message of impossible space.
Disoriented.
Yeah,
I feel like a little
exactly.
bit too with that space.
And the use of color is so precise and consistent throughout it that it just feels like it's a world you can immerse yourself in so much that like at a certain point it becomes less about the narrative and more just about like, I want to visit the Overlook again.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I want to be the caretaker.
Yeah.
I told you some weird things are going to come up in this episode.
I want to be the caretaker.
So summary for anybody who hasn't seen this, Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, is hired as the off-season caretaker for the Grand Overlook Hotel in the Rockies. But when he, his wife Wendy, played by Shelley Duvall, and his son Danny, played by Danny Lloyd, are snowed in alone in the enormous hotel, echoes of the Overlook's violent past begin to shine through into the present. Or is it the other way around? And this is, as I was trying to think about what the first time I saw this was, I think I was probably, I want to say maybe around 13. And my film mentor, who's now passed, was a guy named Ted Flicker. He was the co-creator of the TV show Barney Miller, and he also made a really crazy cult film that made fun of the FBI and got banned by the FBI. He was a really big proponent of improv early in the like New York and Chicago improv scenes.
Oh, wow.
And he loved to brag about how, according to him, he was the person who's taught Stanley Kubrick improv. And so he would I would like go up to his house in Santa Fe and he would tell me stories about Stanley, dear old Stanley. God. And so I can't, as we talk about The Shining, I can't help referring to him as like, dear old Stanley. So I apologize in advance. It's going to creep back in.
I love that. No, please keep that going.
I don't know for sure if that's true, but Ted Flicker maintained it until his dying day.
Yeah, you gotta go with it.
We'll give him Stanley. Love you, Ted. R.I.P. So let's talk about the source material a little bit, especially since I know you also have Stephen King notes. Obviously, this is an adaptation that King famously hated and continues to hate, although maybe a little bit of the sting is lessening with age. He's still he's not a happy camper. And the novel The Shining was released in 1977. It was only his third published novel, so it was very early in his career.
Yeah, also 1977? And then this was
1980.
Wow.
And the filming took over a year again, so it really turned around fast, which is really interesting, right? And like a lot of King's work from that period, or actually it's also this third novel was kind of the one that really sort of cemented King's reputation in the horror genre. And like a lot of his work from that period, it's heavily based in his own experiences with alcoholism, as is Misery.
Oh, yeah.
But also, obviously, this kind of storied visit he took to the Stanley Hotel, which is what the Overlook is based on. Stanley Hotel is in Estes Park, Colorado, which is a town that my dad's family used to live in.
Oh, really?
Which is fun. But the Stanley, he and his wife Tabitha stayed at the Stanley at the very end of the season. They were the only guests at the hotel at the time. They ate, I know, I didn't know any of this until this time. They ate dinner all alone in the grand room with this canned orchestral music playing.
Oh, Spooksville.
I know. And that night after his wife went to bed, King walked down to the bar and had a drink alone with a bartender named Grady.
Oh, God.
That was really like the fact that cinched it for me. And then he went to bed that night and had a nightmare about his young son, who was around Danny's age, being chased through the halls of the hotel by an animate fire hose.
Oh.
Which I thought was super interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, that doesn't, I haven't read the book yet. I desperately want to, and I'm sorry, Twig. But as far as I know, there is no animate fire hose in the book, The Shining.
Okay.
And it's like this weirdly, it's the kind of image that I'm sure is scary in a dream, but
Right.
saying it
Oh,
out
yeah.
loud
Yeah,
awake,
no.
it mostly just feels like very Freudian.
Yeah.
And so I just think that's like a really interesting key to beginning to unlock a bit of like what
Yeah.
he's unpacking with this story, that it came from this image of his son being chased by a fire hose. Yeah, right?
Weird and brilliant. Weird/brilliant brain, that man.
Truly. Oh God. Maybe one day we can get him on the podcast.
That would be
That would be the
awesome.
dream. Obviously there's a sequel, Doctor Sleep, which was released in
Yes.
2013. The adaptation into film was released in 2019. And that was let's see. I think the original The Shining was partially inspired by King reading this Ray Bradbury short story called The
Oh.
Veldt, which kind of gave him this seed idea of writing about dreams coming to life. And part of The Shining also came from the recycled idea for this never finished novel he was working on for a while called Dark Shine, which I think is a great title also. And it's about a psychic boy in an amusement park. So it's interesting seeing like, it's almost like The Shining meets It.
Yeah.
Like these kind of, it's fun seeing where he like draws back from the same well like that. Also very clearly inspired by Poe and The Haunting of Hill House, which is one of my favorite books of all time. You can get it at Beastly Books. And arguably kind of the definitive haunted house story ever. So, which the haunted hotel is like this interesting expansion of the idea of the haunted house into a space that is also inhabited by kind of like shadowy strangers. I think that's part of what to me is extra creepy about a hotel compared to a house, that like you don't know who's behind every door. And that's something that he's playing a lot.
So many people, so many strangers versus
so many strangers all sleeping together.
Ew.
The title apparently came from the John Lennon song Instant Karma also, which I'd never known. There's a lyric in that song about we all shine on, and that's where he got the phrasing of The Shining from. And at the time, the two books that preceded this were Carrie and Salem's Lot. And his publisher told him, you shouldn't follow these up with The Shining. People are going to think you're a horror author. And obviously,
he's like, hold my pen.
Yeah, Stephen King was like, thank you.
That's what I'm going for, my dude.
Goal. He's like, did you read these books?
I think, if you're 3 for 3, you're not trying to be a fan, like I don't know, children's author.
Which, like, I also just, like, as a creative person, just a shout out to other creative people to keep in mind that when the people around you tell you to avoid doing the thing because you're gonna get,
kind of put in a
box. If it's the thing you want to be doing,
that's the box you want to be in.
Claim that box, man. You jump into that box. So let's talk about the adaptation, which, again, was the source of much hatred between Kubrick and King.
I only found this out through George. George told me.
Oh, funny. What did he say?
He just said, did you know that there was another film that's Stephen King made, like, after, I don't know how far after, but he was like, he hated the original because one of the main things, and not to like speak, you absolutely have this in your notes, but I know that in the novel, Jack was kind of like a loving, like, family guy in the beginning, and he didn't go he didn't like start at 100. He kind of like ramped up that way, which I always find interesting because
Nicholson starts at 100.
Oh,
for sure.
It's just immediately hates his family. Immediately hates.
Immediately is like dreaming about axe murdering.
Yeah. So I know that was like the biggest thing, at least from what George had told me, and so he like made his own and wanted it his way. But I didn't even know this one no pun intended, outshines that one so much that
it's so interesting, right? I'm so curious where George sits on that as like an author whose work has been adapted, whether he likes the King original or the movie better?
He didn't
that'd be
really give
interesting.
I think he just I mean The Shining is The Shining.
It's The Shining.
But I think there is
it's hard to
that
go wrong with either version,
yeah.
I think, but
I think there's something, and this isn't speaking for George, but I think there's something of like creating stuff. If you let it go, you kind of have to let the
for
other
sure.
creative kind of
Right.
take it as their own. And if you want to do it your way, like do it, then
Do
you
it
do
your
it.
way. Yeah.
You know, so.
But so part of King had originally done a screenplay of The Shining that Kubrick rejected, which
Well, yeah.
sets things off to a bad
Oh
foot.
boy.
Which, you know, I kind of wonder how he would have viewed this adaptation had he not also tried to do one himself.
Right. He was already kind of stuck in.
Right.
that.
That's gonna taint your feelings about whatever other work other people do on it.
Did
But
he write the script? Did Stephen King write the script prior to Kubrick being like hired on this project, or did he have it like locked and loaded already?
I think so. Essentially, the story of how Kubrick got the project, and I'm getting to answering that, but
We can wait.
no. So this was Kubrick's follow up to Barry Lyndon, which was this like gorgeous period drama where he's like famous for managing to light rooms as if it's lit only by candlelight.
Oh,
And
cool.
like just like filling a room with like millions
Yeah.
of candles, and it's beautiful and elegant and a financial catastrophe. And so Kubrick looked at this financial catastrophe and was like, I need to make something that makes money. I'm gonna
Right.
make a horror movie. And which, right?
Hmm.
Interesting, isn't it?
I guess there was like horror in the 70s. There's a lot of good horror coming.
And I
came
mean,
from the 70s.
even to this day, horror in general is often considered like a safer financial bet because
You know,
there are
there's
always going to be people like you and me who
built-in
will watch
audience.
something just because it scares us.
Right.
And it also tends to be comparatively a cheaper genre to make
Yeah,
stuff
that's fair.
in.
That's fair.
So in a lot of ways, it's considered like a safer bet. But so he was in this period of soliciting horror books. And there's this story that his assistant tells that he would just get like stacks and stacks of horror books in, and she would hear the sound of book after book hitting
Just
the
hitting the
floor and
ground.
going like pop, pop, pop.
Nope.
And she went, I haven't heard a book hit the floor in a while.
Oh,
and she
shit.
goes in and looks, and
There he
he's
is.
just poring over a copy of The
Oh,
Shining.
wow.
So
That's so cool.
my sense from that story is that it was always going to be Kubrick adapting it, and then King wrote a screenplay kind of on spec for him, or Kubrick commissioned it. I don't know
Yeah.
between those two. But Kubrick was not happy with how it turned out.
Yeah.
And essentially kind of his justification for this was that he felt like it was too literal and not, you know,
Different
enough
mediums.
of a screenplay, different
Yeah.
mediums. And also, you know, again, King is very early in his career at this point. It's
Yeah.
only his third book, and he's,
Crazy.
as far as I know, I don't know if he'd written any other screenplays at this point, but like
Right.
he's a young writer. And
She's like,
so
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do the extra work.
yeah, which I love.
Yeah.
Love that energy, but also can understand Kubrick being like, I'm gonna bring in somebody whose thing is screenwriting.
Yeah, who does this?
And so the version we get is co-written by Kubrick and a co-writer. Let me find her name. Diane Johnson, which interesting to me that it's a female co-writer. And she hated the book. She was extremely disdainful towards it. Which it's kind of funny reading interviews with her. I was like, oh my God, between the two of them, Kubrick is the one with more respect for Stephen King, which is
Yeah.
saying something. And let's see. So I'm trying to figure out where to dive in here. There's a lot of differences, some of which are more severe than others. You hit on the one that King cites as his biggest issue. But also in the book, Jack didn't just break Danny's arm, he also assaulted one of his students when he was a teacher, and that's why he lost his teaching job.
Oh, yeah, because it's
which
never really.
It's never
he'd kind
revealed.
of. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, you knew something kind of
Mhm.
was going on there, or maybe he got fired from like drinking. And,
Right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
implied that it's something bad, but we don't
Yeah.
find out what, which I think is also interesting then that King is like he needs to be nicer from the beginning, when in the
Mhm.
book this is a guy who was assaulting his students from the beginning too. So it's
Yeah.
very complicated. He's also in the book writing a play, not a novel, which I thought was fascinating because that kind of adds this meta touch, or could add this meta touch that Kubrick kind of doesn't play with, which
Yeah.
is interesting to me. In the book, there used to be an introduction and a conclusion to the book that got excised for publication that were called Before the Play and After the Play. So
Oh.
the entirety of The Shining, the book, is kind of framed as the play,
Yeah.
which I thought was fun,
That's
given
cool.
all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy,
Yeah.
too. But I just found that fascinating that play structure is so prominent in the novel and is essentially nowhere in the movie.
Yeah.
And also Jack in the novel, this kind of connects to Misery in interesting ways. In the novel, he finds a scrapbook in the basement, which has kind of the history of the Overlook.
Yeah.
Much like
in
Kathy Bates'
Misery,
scrapbook.
Love a scrapbook in a horror
Love
movie.
a good scrapbook. And basically, this is where he finds out the history of Grady. This is where he recognizes the photo from.
Okay.
And they wrote and shot this scene, and then Kubrick decided to take it out. And Diane Johnson was like, I wish you'd kept this in because there's references to it in the script. It feels like this missing piece where you kind of get an understanding of what's going on.
Do you feel like it's a missing piece?
I'm glad they took it out.
I'm glad they took it out. I feel like that's too, in the world that Kubrick built around this, novel and this idea, I think it would have been too on the nose horror. Like
I agree.
This was kind of a more abstract horror film. I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah, it would have been too like, oh, there's that trope of like digging. I feel like it doesn't have a ton of tropes in that way.
Yeah, well,
so having that in there would have made it. It would have been out of place.
It would have been out of place. I agree. And I think so much of what this film is playing with, as opposed to the novel, is this question of like, how much is the individual responsibility of Jack the person in this timeline? How much is the ghost of the hotel coming through? How much is spiritual? How much is psychological?
Yeah.
And to me, the idea of him finding the scrapbook that like has the history laid out makes it very literal and very like, okay, it's the haunted hotel taking him over. Whereas when we don't know, it's more like it's coming from his subconscious potentially, and that's more interesting to me.
His character, I feel like his character development would have been a completely different shift too, because once he found that out and he knows, like once he as the character becomes aware that it's the hotel, I think then that would turn into a battle of like him with himself,
right? Which it
versus
kind of
him
is more
outwardly.
in the novel.
Yeah,
there's more. There's like a moment in the novel where it's almost like Jack is possessed, and there's a moment where he kind of regains control of himself as he's chasing Danny, and is like, "Danny, run away, get help." I'm glad they didn't do that.
Yeah, it completely. That's probably Stephen
This is
King's.
Stephen King's problem. Yeah, it's a different story.
It's a completely different story.
It's a different story, but I think the one we got is one that's much more about human nature, and that's what's scary about it to me, is the human parts.
Yeah. Is this him the whole time? Was this always in him, or is it the hotel? Versus, oh, I'm haunted by a ghost that's here.
Yes.
I'm
by
not
a
a
hotel
bad man.
ghost. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot deeper.
Well, and it's also, the novel is much more from Danny's perspective. So there's much more that's kind of through the eyes of a child, whereas the film is we're seeing this world through Jack Torrance. It's an unreliable narrator, and it's, a narrator who's going through a psychological crisis. And to me, that's a really fascinating distinction too, because it's like, I think it could be equally scary for it to be from this child perspective, watching all of this horror kind of unfold around you that you can't understand.
Yeah.
But instead, it again becomes much more about perception versus reality, and kind of the ways that we as adults sort of fool ourselves with our narratives of who we are versus who we actually are.
Right.
And to me, that's just
Well, Danny technically is an unreliable narrator. I mean, a kid, you got to think like even me being like, did I see this film as a kid? I don't know. Like you're, I think also if you tell stories so many times from your youth, it's like, am I just pulling parts from what I've heard others say, or like, is it getting foggy? So I guess in both those ways, they're both from unreliable
just
narrators.
Kind of on different sides of the spectrum. It's also in the book much clearer that Tony is Danny himself, because it's revealed that Danny's middle name is Anthony. So there's like a clear tie, whereas in the movie it's again kind of left ambiguous, where it's like, is he possessed? Is it Danny? Is it what is the entity that is Tony? Which is
love Tony. He lives in my mouth. He goes out of my stomach when he's scared.
It also, let's see, Jack has much worse writer's block in the movie than in the book. The all work no play scene doesn't even exist in the novel. That's just in the movie.
When he says it,
the typed that like her coming into the room, seeing the typed
that part
pages.
Gets me every time. Also, why does she flip through like is she trying to read the whole thing? Like, oh, maybe it'll get to a point where he actually wrote something.
Maybe down at the bottom,
2 pages.
Yeah,
I need 2 pages to be like, nope. All the rest of the things,
I just need to see that he's formatted it differently, and it's just all the same words.
It's so cool. I love looking at it though. I'm actually glad that
I paused on that scene this time a couple different times, and like. The set dressers had so much fun with that. There's like typos that get increasingly worse as it goes on. And my favorite one is all work and no play makes Jack a dull bot.
Yeah. Oh, funny.
I was like,
we saw another one that made us laugh too. Yeah, watching this.
There's one where there's one where it's boy spelled B-O-I, and I was like, same.
Boy.
Love it.
It was really cool to see.
It's so good. Also, Wendy as a character is very different in the novel, and this was another thing that King had difficulty with, was that in the book Wendy is much more, she's stronger, she stands up for herself more, she's much more cool, calm, and collected. She's not kind of as terrified until the very end, and she talks a lot more. She has more agency. And Kubrick's sort of defense of this was basically, I don't think that person would put up with Jack Torrance for this long. Which I can kind of see it both ways.
Well, yeah, you got to think, starting off Jack being this like likable guy who's been battling these issues versus a guy that's clearly got a lot of shit.
Versus Jack Nicholson.
She's been probably abused. Yeah. Like if he did that to the kid, probably more things happened to the kid. Oh my God,
of course.
Who knows what happened to her. She's
exactly.
maybe she started that way. Like, again, that unspoken backstory probably started that way. And then I see her just being like, okay, I can't put up a fight anymore or I'll get hurt.
Exactly. And apparently Diane Johnson had written a lot more dialogue for Shelley Duvall, and it just got cut. Which kind of, again, goes to how horrible the set was for her, which we're about to get to. But also, the novel ends kind of, the most obvious plot difference is that instead of freezing to death in the maze, the novel ends with the faulty boiler of the hotel, which is this big plot point in the novel, exploding and blowing up the entire the entire hotel. So it's this really interesting like death by fire versus death by freezing ending that like I was thinking a lot about the elements of that, and obviously it kind of leaves the door open to the hotel still existing. I think that's like the right choice to end with. But
although a little jump to Misery, in the novel Misery, they and I have the quote in my notes, but they actually on like page 211, I remember that. Ooh. He's driving through and it makes note that there was some reporter that had passed through the town doing an article on the Shining or the Overlook Hotel that had burned down 10 years prior. So
they exist in the same universe.
They exist in the same universe, and he did keep the burning element, obviously, in Misery.
That.
But that, it's not nodded to in the film. But yeah, so I guess I did kind of know that.
I love that. Yeah. Oh, how interesting. Yeah. Wow. And like, obviously now that image of Jack's frozen face is like one of the most...
Did I do
that was so good.
Should I do it to camera?
Yes, please.
Nobody watches this video.
Masterpiece.
You have to do it now, just because I did it.
I don't feel like that was nearly as good as yours.
Oh my God. I know that face is so iconic.
So good.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Blowing it up versus keeping it.
Versus
I think in the film
it.
with everything, the idea is that now Jack is going to, be haunting it even more.
Well, and also even like freezing as a death, there's sort of this like not completely closed off quality to it, where it's like he could be defrosted and come back, like not literally, but like open. There's because of like there's like this kind of like cryogenic implication almost of like especially because like I always think when I see
preservation of it.
Yeah, when I see that like death face that he has, I always think like he looks like a caveman, and there's like almost this sense of like he's like being frozen in time to come back later, which I think is really
it's a theme.
Totally.
Yeah. I also just think it with that whole ending where he's walking through the maze and starting to slur his words because he's slowly starting to freeze over time. It just kind of, I don't know, that it just. With the film, there's that looming just like, oh my God, they can't leave this place. They can't contact like the snow. I think to have it then blow up would just be almost a cop out.
Yeah.
For, the buildup of the scene. So
Agreed.
Yeah, glad that change was made.
I think it was really smart.
Also, budget wise, I'm sure that was a lot easier.
Yeah. Although, Lord knows, Kubrick didn't care about his investors' pockets very much. I found the Stephen King shade quotes about The Shining, especially about Wendy. I loved. He said,
him shading Kubrick. Okay.
Yes, he said Kubrick's version with Wendy was basically just there to scream and be stupid, and that's not the woman I wrote about. Which, like, did we watch the same movie?
Yeah.
While Kubrick thought that the kind of strong, independent woman King wrote about wouldn't have put up with Jack, King actually ended up calling it a film by a man who thinks too much and feels too little. Which is
wrong? No.
That's what I wrote too. I was like, that is Kubrick.
Yeah,
he is a man
who Kubrick would say that's Kubrick.
I think Kubrick would be flattered.
I think he's been quoted saying that.
I think Stanley, for one.
Stanley, darling.
Also, the novel features the spectral voice of Jack's father, which doesn't appear at all in the movie, but Jack is kind of like being haunted by his own dad, which I thought it's interesting given how many sort of father-son themes are strewn throughout. But I also kind of was thinking about that, and then I was like, I think it's kind of Kubrick in this case. He's sort of like the unseen, terrifying daddy figure in the shadows hovering over every shot. Like, he kind of, in a meta way, takes up that role.
Yeah.
Which is...
Too many things, I think, if it was put in the film.
Too many dads in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Literally. Okay, production. I mentioned this is his follow-up to Barry Lyndon. Part of the reason, you're going to love this, part of the reason that he decided to go for horror specifically as a way to make something financially viable was because he had just turned down The Exorcist, which was released at the same time as Barry Lyndon and did fabulously. So he got a little butthurt and was like, well, now I have to make my own horror movie.
I gotta do mine now. That's how Stanley Kubrick does.
That's Stanley. It was a 19 mil budget, which is pretty hefty for the time.
Yeah.
But, given that it shot for, I think, 14 months, is not actually as big as it could have been.
Yeah.
And it went on to make 47.3 million. So it did well.
Really?
Yeah.
Keep those... And that's worldwide?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, keep that in mind for what Misery made.
Oh, interesting.
But you gotta think 10-year difference.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
different landscape.
Oh, fascinating. Was it more or less?
They made more, yeah.
Interesting. Which, like, between the two, I feel like The Shining has had, like, the bigger cultural impact.
Oh, by far. Most people, I think, if given the two, Shining is one.
Just one.
They've either seen or they've seen more. Yeah.
And it was actually released the same weekend as Empire Strikes Back and beat Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, that's cool.
Box office,
wow.
Which I was like, that's right.
That's kind of cool.
Horror taking the lead.
Yeah.
Love to see it. I found this great Kubrick quote about it where he says, there's something inherently wrong with the human personality. There's an evil side to it. One of the things that horror stories can do is to show us the archetypes of the unconscious. We can see the dark side without having to confront it directly, which I think it almost makes me wonder why he didn't make more horror, because that's, I think, a really good articulation of what's special about the genre and feels to me like somebody who's a fan.
Yeah, but do you think he was like, I don't want to be, again, talking about that box, he probably didn't want to be in that box. He was
That's a
like,
good
I'm going to
point.
do this,
It's a good
but
point.
only sparingly.
Only when
Because I'm a filmmaker, not
only
a horror
when
director.
my high art candlelit period saga doesn't do well at the box office.
Yeah, you only get these when I fail at other things. Then you peasants can have your horror.
Which, God, it almost reminds me though of like David Lynch making Blue Velvet after Dune. It's like you need these like box office failures
to
for like
drive up the
drive you to do
Bummer,
something
man. Just
creative.
make a thing.
Yeah. And talking about sort of his adaptation process, he said he wanted to really lean away from the ghost story elements in the book, saying that they would, quote, imply the possibility that there was something beyond death. And Kubrick didn't believe in anything, quote, not even hell. Wanted to make sure nobody thought he believes in hell.
You got it, buddy.
Right? Meanwhile, Diane Johnson, who was a Gothic literature professor, thought Stephen King was just kind of schlocky and openly called the book pretentious and bad.
Oh my God. The amount of just like turbulence in this film and like friction from every angle.
Well,
but again, it's so good because of it, probably.
Well, and also, like, no wonder Stephen King got a little insulted if the people adapting your work are calling it pretentious and bad.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And at the time, it actually was not that great of a critical success. A lot of reviewers, a lot of people thought that it was too slow, which I thought was interesting because I think it's now set the pacing for a lot of horror movies. The way that kind of movies within this specific sort of genre of horror, or subgenre, I should say, work, I think take a lot of cues from the pacing of The Shining.
I love a slow pacing. Just a
me
sidebar.
too.
I love when every time someone, I'll be like, oh, how was the film? They're like, I didn't really like it. It felt really like slow or whatever. I'm like, well, I'm gonna love it.
I know.
I'm gonna love it. It gives me time to like settle in and again, like live in the story
experience
a little bit more.
the world. Yeah.
I don't need fast. I love a very slow,
a slow burn.
Yeah.
Or a slow freeze.
Slow freeze.
A slow freeze. Love a slow
freezer
freeze.
burn.
Perfect. The Shining Part 3.
Freezer burn. You're welcome.
I hate myself. I found a great Gene Siskel quote from his review of The Shining, which he gave 2 stars out of 4. Called it a crashing disappointment. The biggest surprise is that it contains virtually no thrills. Given Kubrick's world-class reputation, one's immediate reaction is that maybe he was after something other than thrills in the film. If so, it's hard to figure out what. Which, like, yeah, clearly he was after something other than just thrills in the film. Like, but I wanted to turn it to you and say, what do you think he was after?
That's a really big question. What was Kubrick after in this film?
Yeah, if not thrills, what's he making it for?
No.
Yes, I love it.
I don't know. I think it's such like a if not thrills. I got to think of one word for this.
You don't have to think. I'll tell you what kind of my response was, which is like Stephen King, particularly in the decades since writing The Shining, has kind of looked back on it and said, this was kind of a confession. This was sort of me talking about my worst self. And working through what that looked like. And to me, a lot of the film feels sort of similarly like the kind of the ending message I always get from it is that the thing we're most scared of is ourselves. Our like what we ourselves are capable of.
Yeah. Well, even the quote, like the internal demons.
Exactly.
The battle with those versus.
And that to me feels like, I think the idea that he's looking for thrills feels very externally oriented, and to me The Shining is a very internal facing movie. It's
outward demons versus inward demons.
Exactly. You're reading my mind, my dear.
It's called The Shining.
I mean, which, like,
Siena.
again, Siskel, what part of this were you not picking up on?
I just think some people like to be haters.
That's true.
I just think
that's true.
Horror haters.
So we got to talk about the cast a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We got to talk about, again, like I said, I don't want to go into too much detail about the horrors that Shelley Duvall was subjected to, because I think it gets...
People know. I feel bad talking too much.
Yeah. I think people know. I think, again, there are people who are more qualified to talk about it.
Yeah.
I think if that's what you want to find out more about, I would actually watch Vivian Kubrick's documentary, because that's a woman's perspective on the inside of the set of exactly what was going on and what it felt like. And I think that's going to do a better job of talking about it than I ever could.
Yeah, that's where I learned from clips that I've seen from that.
But I do think it's interesting to note that Kubrick spent so much time, like, he made her allegedly do 127 takes of the scene backing up the staircase.
127? I didn't realize it was that many. Could I be sobbing too?
Yeah, of course. And, like, it's particularly tragic because this film was given 2 Razzies, or nominated for 2 Razzies the year the Razzies started. One of them was for Worst Director, one was for Worst Actress for Shelley Duvall, and they revoked it last year in 2022 when the set conditions were revealed, because they were like, we can't, it's not fair to criticize the performance of somebody who is being abused on camera.
Like, you're actually seeing you're actually seeing trauma played out on screen versus
but it was something that I was thinking a lot about this watch, how interesting and how fucked up that Kubrick made her repeat her performance so many times and was so harsh on her, when Jack Nicholson is right there being the hammiest motherfucker possible.
So hammy.
And, like, it works.
Wasn't he just, like,
absolutely.
chain smoking, like, off screen too? Like, just hanging out while she's doing that?
The two of them were playing pranks on her the whole time. It was very much like
Poor Shelley. Justice for Shelley Duvall,
guys set. But it was interesting. It's like there's this distrust not just of Shelley's ability to act, to just, like, do her job as an actress,
feel those things.
But there's also, I think, behind that, this kind of obsession with this idea of artistic authenticity that I just find silly in the context of a film that largely takes place in a fantasy space to begin with. Like,
ghost story.
It's a ghost story. This is not, we don't have to Brando this shit. Like, this is not
also,
that kind of world.
Then recast her.
Exactly.
You have the ability to.
Well, and that was one of the things that I noted and that I kept thinking about this time is, like, again, this is Stanley we're talking about. This is a man who gets what he wants.
Yeah.
If he had wanted, again, he shot for a full year. If he had wanted to recast Shelley Duvall, if he had truly felt like she wasn't doing a good enough job, he would have recast her. And so what I see from that is that he knew she was capable of it. Deep down, he believed she was capable of it, and he just took an excuse to torture her. Anyway.
I was going to say, at that point, he was just doing his own little social experiment.
It's not really about the acting. At that point.
Yeah, it goes past that. I think when you're 127.
Exactly. And so that's, like, the main point that I want to make there is just it really wasn't about the acting.
Yeah. Any up and coming filmmakers, don't
do
that.
Don't be that. Meanwhile, Nicholson. First of all, I just think in a film where there's so much about doubling and doppelgangers, it's fun to me that 2 of the 3 lead characters are played by people whose actors share the name of the character. Danny is played by a Danny, and Jack is played by a Jack. But also other kind of actors who were in contention for the role were Robert De Niro, Harrison Ford, and Robin Williams.
Oh, funny. Which I have some crossover with Misery, too.
Oh,
I
fascinating.
mean, you got to think leading men. So people are going to want to put them in.
But I almost... I, like, hated the Robin Williams idea, and then I loved it.
Who was the second one? Robert De Niro?
Harrison Ford.
Harrison Ford. And then Robin Williams.
And obviously King, as we talked about, hated this casting, particularly because Nicholson was just coming off of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And so he had just done this performance playing crazy. And so it's interesting because now we just think of Nicholson as a crazy dude.
Yeah.
At the time, it was because he had just played a crazy character.
Definitely.
And so they didn't want him to be stereotyped because of that.
Which is
now we just know it's just him. That's just the man. And to cast, which King had kind of a whole list of people he wanted. One of his top choices was Martin Sheen, which I thought is interesting, from Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
Which I could see it being really good, but again, completely different movie.
Yeah.
For Danny, they had sort of very specific geographic casting. They went to Chicago, Denver, and Cincinnati because they wanted to find a child actor whose accent kind of fell in the middle between Jack and Shelley's, who were from Texas and the East Coast. So they were like looking geographically and kind of the belt in between, which was super interesting.
Yeah. Kid's so good in that too.
He's so good. And apparently, according to sources,
blanketed
sources, Kubrick says that he kept Danny Lloyd, the actor, from knowing that he was shooting a horror movie the whole time.
That's what I've heard too.
Which I was watching it this time and I was like, how do you do that?
You tell him it's a drama.
You tell him it's a drama, but so much of it is the kid acting scared. Like, what kind of a drama ends with your character screaming, being chased through a maze?
Red rum.
Like, what kind of drama is this?
I mean, like, oh, you're just like your goofy imaginary friend that lives in your tummy, and you just
isn't here, Mrs. Torrance.
And I'm definitely not spelling murder on the wall. Which, can we talk about how the kid just spelled murder in the most iconic way?
It's so...
How many takes was that? One?
Well, and I love the kind of twisting of the R's so that they sort of mirror each other.
I was like, he's spelling that D backwards. Duh, Al. It is backwards.
Also, we're getting now into kind of some other miscellaneous production facts. I had thought this entire time that they actually shot at the Stanley Hotel. They didn't shoot there at all.
Just inspired by.
It was actually a hotel in Yosemite National Park and the Timberline Lodge in Oregon. So two kind of very geographically different places. Both those hotels were designed by the same person. But still, it's interesting because... King really wanted Stanley to shoot at the Stanley Hotel.
Yeah, of course.
And Kubrick vetoed it because apparently A, it was too snowy, and B, there wasn't enough power. I don't buy it.
It's a hotel.
I don't buy it.
You could have everyone having something plugged in at the same time.
And any hotel that they were shooting at, like the Timberline Lodge in Oregon, I guarantee you any hotel you're going to like that
less power.
With a film crew, you're going to have to bring a generator in there. And
he just didn't want to.
He just didn't want to, which is just, it's so funny. The pettiness, man. The pettiness.
What a
brat. They also shot this sequentially, which is extremely rare. And part of the reason production lasted so long is because there was a fire that destroyed one of the sets, which, like, a little bit cursed.
Oh, wow. That's a bummer.
And they actually, Kubrick shot different language versions of the all work and no play scene so that for like the German, the Spanish, the French versions of the film,
like written down,
there would be typed versions with the different languages.
That's kind of cool. That's actually fun.
Yeah. And they used like different like native idioms that kind of had similar meanings.
Okay. That's cool.
I pulled the Spanish one because I thought it was interesting. It's no por mucho madrugar amanece más temprano. No matter how early you get up, you can't make the sun rise any sooner, which I thought was kind of fun given the ending as the sun is rising over Jack's corpse.
That's cool.
I love when filmmakers think about the other language audiences out there.
That's cool. I don't know. Everything we're talking about, I wouldn't have pegged him to do that.
Right? That's like a surprisingly kind thing for him to have done.
He's like, there you go. Character. That's all you get.
That's all you get. Also, one of the first films to use a Steadicam. They had the
Really?
inventor of the Steadicam on set for a lot of the shoot to kind of advise on it. And of course, now it's become this like totally ubiquitous
Yeah.
staple. But I think it's a brilliant choice for it because Steadicams, it brings this slight sense of breadth to the camera
Mhm.
that a tracking shot on a dolly doesn't
Yeah.
have, where you can feel just the slightest sense of like the presence of a body behind the
Mhm.
camera that I love, and that I
Yeah.
think for something like this that's about haunting just feels right.
Yeah.
And actually Kubrick attached a speedometer to the mount for the famous hallway scene where Danny's rolling
Oh,
down
yeah.
so that he could make sure that he had exactly identical timing each time.
Oh.
Which I love details like
Yeah.
that of
No wonder this took a year.
I
Over a
know,
year.
right? He also post-theatrical release kept shaving minutes off of the cut. So the version that was released the first day is 27 minutes longer than the version that we have now.
Oh, wow.
So
Wow, 3 hours?
yeah. So as it was in theaters, he was progressively cutting it, which is just
Talk about someone just take like
crazy man behavior.
chill out, man.
Yeah, chill out. Although I will say one of the things he cut, I think, was a very wise decision. There was going to be an epilogue scene where it's revealed that Jack's body was never found, and Danny is
Ooh.
given back Jack's tennis ball, which like creepy
Ew,
image,
yeah.
but kind of the idea behind it, Kubrick had kind of originally wanted to give them a moment of normalcy at the end, which I think feels very much like the ending we do get in
Rewarded.
Misery. It's like we get this kind of all's well theoretically, but we're
We
still
know.
being haunted
Yeah.
feeling. And I think where it actually leaves us is this place that's so much more ambiguous and unclear. And
Yeah, you kind of your brain can kind of put in
Mhm.
those pieces, or you can kind of steer what could happen
yeah,
after.
and I think the whole plot of The Shining is very much like the layout of the Overlook Hotel, designed to not quite fit together. Like, people love to pick this film apart and be like, oh, it doesn't make sense. There are these plot holes. And like, yes, that's
Yeah.
the point to me, is that it's not clear and it doesn't fully make sense, any explanation of, is Jack the reincarnation of the Gradys? There's also,
Right.
we hear two different Gradys mentioned. There's Delbert Grady and I think Samuel Grady. There's like, there are all these little inconsistencies. And to me, that's part of the horror, is
Yeah.
this sense that no matter how much you puzzle it over, you're never going to find one narrative that fully fits. And that's
Yeah.
kind of how real life is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to me, ending where it does, not letting us know what happens with Jack's body, not letting us know what happens with Danny, is so much more powerful.
Yeah.
So thanks for continuing to cut after releasing your movie, I guess.
Right.
There's also Ridley Scott recycled some outtakes from The Shining's opening in the original cut of Blade Runner, which I thought was fun. Some
Oh.
of the overhead aerial shots.
Yeah, which were so pretty. So yeah, use those babies.
Use them. The breaking down the door scene,
Yeah.
it's a real door.
He really just
It's a real
swung
door
at it.
because they'd at first gotten like a fake, like a film door for Jack
you could
Nicholson to break
Did
in.
he just blow it off the hinges?
Well, Jack Nicholson had been a volunteer firefighter before, and so he just like chopped that shit down, no problem.
That's so funny.
And Stanley Kubrick was like, "We need you to go slower.
We'll get
Let's
some real doors in
let's
here."
give you an actual challenge."
Oh,
So
it's one of my favorite shots too, of him swinging and following the axe to the door.
Mhm.
Oh, I love it so much.
and like famously, the "Here's Johnny" is an improv, which is like a reference to the Johnny Carson show.
Yeah.
But he only did one take with that, and Kubrick almost didn't use it because he'd been living overseas for so long that he didn't get the reference. And he was like, "I don't know what this is."
Yeah.
And he had to be talked into using that take. So
Again, just those little moments of like,
right. And my last little tidbit before we dive into like the actual watch. One of the films, obviously a lot of filmmakers will screen other movies for people on set as kind of like a tone setter.
oh yeah.
One of the ones that he used, that he made the crew kind of like obsessively watch, was David Lynch's Eraserhead,
Oh,
which I thought was
funny.
Yeah,
It's been forever since I've seen that one.
I wouldn't have immediately connected those two in my head, but there is some sort of a tonal similarity that I think comes across to me in interesting ways.
Yeah.
Themes. This is a movie filled with conspiracies, or a movie surrounded by conspiracies, I should say. I know I mentioned as we were walking in the documentary Room 237, which is ostensibly about the making of The Shining. It's kind of more about the conspiracies surrounding the making of The Shining. There's a whole lot of talk about how this film is Stanley Kubrick's confession that he faked the moon landing. It's if you want to know the like logic behind that, the moon is about 237,000 miles from Earth. And in the book, it's a different number room. And so everybody was like, why did he choose the number 237? 237 is the code number used in Dr. Strangelove to activate a nuclear holocaust. So it's a reference to his own movie. It's not him
that deep.
Faking the moon landing, but okay. Also, the Timberline Hotel, which is the one that scene was shot in, had requested the change from 217 to 237 because they had a room 217 and they were scared that nobody would want to stay in the Shining room. And of course, now room 217 is the most requested room at the Timberline because of course it is.
Yes.
So it's
horror fans are crazy.
Of course. It's also a movie that people love to kind of give grand academic readings to. So there's like a lot of people who've written about it as like this Oedipal struggle between the generations of the father and the son. There's kind of like a weird, complicated theory that the whole film is Kubrick's commentary on American colonialism and like the genocide of indigenous people, which I think gives Kubrick way more credit than he deserves personally.
I'd be curious to see what those essays are about.
The idea behind it is like the hotel is built on Indian burial ground.
Oh yeah, they do mention that a bunch.
There's like the
artifacts.
The idea that the party that Jack is kind of transported back and forth from is this 4th of July party, his reference to White Man's Burden, the indigenous artwork.
The White Man's Burden line.
So it's like there are things that it's like I can see the argument for it. But again, I don't think it was intentional. I think it's there in the film and I think you can read it in really interesting ways, but I don't think that's one of the things that's coming purposefully from Kubrick. But it's an interesting thing to think about while watching. There's also an even crazier conspiracy theory that it's like all secretly about the Holocaust because Kubrick always said he wanted to make a Holocaust movie, but he never did. But maybe it was secretly The Shining. It's bizarre.
Okay.
People go bananas for this movie.
Oh yeah.
But I just wanted to
again to your point, like all these like it is a little bit abstract.
It's abstract, and so you can kind of
work your theory in there.
Yeah, you can read it however you want to, really. So, okay, that gets me through all of my theory and background notes. Now I can finally dive into my notes from actually watching. I'm going to try and make these as concise as I can.
Okay.
I will make no promises.
Sending good vibes.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll need them. Thoughts and prayers.
Prayers.
I'd remembered this as being shot in a much wider aspect ratio than it actually is. And I was really struck this time by how confined the ratio is. It's this very kind of boxy, sort of trapping the characters within the interior of the frame, which I think says a lot about what he's playing with.
Yeah.
But it's interesting what I remember about The Shining is those long traveling hallway scenes, the overhead shots, and in my brain, that's just turned into it being shot in this like extreme Western style widescreen. But I was thinking this time watching about how the choice to shoot it in that narrow ratio, because a lot of the film uses these kind of extreme wide fisheye lenses, it's usually at the edges of the frame that the fisheye's distortion is the most visible. So it's almost like there is this distortion going on, but the worst parts of it are hidden outside the frame. And I was like, oh, you clever little bastard. Like, there's so much like that that's just emphasizing and overemphasizing the themes through every visual element. The Steadicam, the choice to use it is also brilliant because there's a slight tilt to it in the same way that, from the beginning, not only do we know that Jack Nicholson is going to go off the rails, the camera is already telling us the perspective is a little bit tilted.
Oh, totally.
There are these long dissolves from Jack's face onto the landscape that kind of are visually, literally telling you like he is part of this hotel. The hotel is part of him. They're the same thing.
Yeah.
It also kind of goes to, because there are very few direct cuts in this movie. It's so much of the transition from scene to scene are these extended slow dissolves, which I think really speaks to the way he's
so cool.
It's so beautiful, but it also plays with time in this really interesting way, right? It's like in the same way that Jack has always been the caretaker. It's like time overlaps and bleeds into itself and kind of folds back on itself. It also like creates these connections between distanced places and times, which is like what Shining is. So it's like the camera is almost shining.
Which interesting.
I thought was kind of fun. The costume design so makes Wendy look like an overgrown child, which kind of gives you the sense of pity towards her almost, where she has these like, big oversized boots and her like sweet little primary colors, like overall.
Her outfits, even her hair is like all disheveled and stuff. So.
And so it's like she's constantly sort of dwarfed in these frames in which the environment and her clothing makes her look too small for what's around her.
Which she was a pretty, I feel like
she was tall.
And lean
she
human,
was.
So
so it's very much in the presentation.
Yeah.
And there's also, that famous bathroom scene where Grady tells Jack that he's always been the caretaker. I'm pretty sure that's the only moment in the movie where Kubrick breaks the 180-degree rule, which for those for those of you who do not know this film nerd term, the 180-degree rule is like, okay, so a camera is shooting towards an actor in this direction. Imagine there's an invisible line between the camera and the person they're shooting.
Yeah, it's like if you're shooting, think of a stage play. So you're kind of like shooting from off the stage onto the stage.
You want to shoot from the same general side. Otherwise, the spatial relations get confused.
And eye lines get messed up.
In that scene, Kubrick cuts directly across the 180-degree line so that Jack Torrance and Grady are constantly switching places, which
it's really off-putting.
But it also kind of emphasizes this idea of doubling and doppelgangers, and is he Grady? Is Grady him? The camera is telling us that they are.
Yeah, putting them in the same.
So there's Daddy Stanley's invisible hand looming over every shot. There's also, I think, a lot of things that he does in the plot and in the dialogue to cue viewers into visual things to pay attention to. Like the use of red rum is a reminder to pay attention to mirrors, because we don't understand what red rum means until we see it reflected back.
That makes sense. Yeah, I love those shots in the mirrors too. I never realized it was just like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Wait for this moment.
Yeah, well, and then as you go back and rewatch it, it's like, oh yeah, mirrors continue to have such an important role throughout the film. He's telling us specifically in the explicit action, mirrors are going to be important to watch for mirrors.
Yeah, I mean, even in playing up, like one of the good shots too is when she when she brings him breakfast, and then there's that like, it's just the doubling of personality, which I love. I feel like that's such a horror trope of like, if there's a shot with someone and there's two of them, there's them in the mirror, them in the space. It's like, there's another side to them that we don't know yet.
One of my favorite classes in college was on Gothic fiction, and we read Freud's essay on the uncanny, and one of the things he talks about there is like the idea of the doppelganger, this double being something that is one of the most inherent human fears, and that's like such a big part of The Shining. Color notes.
So much color.
It's so juicy, the color in this movie. I really noticed how prominent orange is this watch. There's, the famous rug or the carpet in that hallway. Ullman's office walls are orange, the orange pillars in the main room, and it's this color of warning and emergency, right? So it's like whenever there's orange, it's almost like...
we start off with orange, basically, with The Office.
Exactly.
And for the interview.
And it's whenever you see orange, it's like things appear to be calm, but just wait. There's a warning there. The green curtain in the bathroom when Danny's shining in the mirror at home in the first time, it's like this echo of the bathroom in room 237 that we see later. In room 237, the bathtub itself, that green bathtub, it echoes the colors of the body of the dead woman inside it, where it's green in the center with a yellow ring around it.
Gross, Sienna.
What I'm here for.
Gross.
Fun fact, the reason that I ended up in the house that I'm in is because it has a green bathtub like in The Shining, which I saw. And
I was just like, I want that sink. I want that toilet.
Yep. Yeah.
Be careful in there.
I find that scene bizarrely
Do you just have red
comforting.
rum written on your mirror in the bathroom?
I should.
You should.
Can work on that. I think also even with things like the prominence of the gold room, where we see the sign saying the gold room, things like that, again, it's cueing us into the way he's using color. It's telling us that color is going to be something that's important in this film. Halloran and Wendy both wear purple nightclothes, so they're kind of visually tied, where they each have the same color purple robe. The bartender in the gold room, his velvet jacket is the same color as Jack's jacket, so that when they're in conversation, it almost looks like he's talking to himself. Sound-wise, I kept thinking that the chanting in the soundtrack near the very end reminded me of Suspiria, and I was like, I bet that Suspiria was referencing this. Looked it up. Suspiria came first. So now I'm wondering if perhaps Kubrick was watching some Giallo movies to prepare for this. I think that the use of title cards was super interesting. That felt like one of the few literary touches that Kubrick leaves in, especially the way that the jump from, 2 weeks later to Tuesday tells you.
It's jarring.
It's jarring. Well, and it's horrifying too, because it's like the countdown has begun to something, and you don't know what. There's, again, with lines like, "Are you getting tired of bombing the universe, Danny?" We get this return to this idea we've seen in a lot of our films of like the threat of violence in media as a motif in horror, and horror films poking fun of the culture's fear of what horror films will do. I noticed this time, I thought it was telling that the hotel seduces him with booze before women, that it knows that's what's going to get to Jack first.
I mean, that's always the order, right?
Yeah, I mean...
booze before women.
I mean, I think for me it would have...
Reversed.
Also, though, the hotel, we see many faces of the Overlook Hotel. I noticed this time, I think the only women we see are in room 237. Which goes to, I think all the other ghosts are male, or they're scary dog-headed creatures.
Oh my God, forgot about that for some reason.
That's to me one of the most memorable shots in the whole movie.
I think my brain was like, nope, you forget this one real quick.
That
mask is so scary.
It's so scary. Well, and I'd never realized, but that scene takes place in Grady's quarters, in like the caretaker's quarters. So I'm curious now if there's an implication that it's somehow tied to Grady. I don't know. We never really find out what's going on there. One. But to me, that's like maybe the most horrifying shot in the whole movie.
It reminds me of old school, like, have you looked up Disneyland old like masks, like when that first opened in the 50s?
No.
They look like that.
Horrifying.
There's like the Country Bears or something. I think they're still at Disneyland and they look like that mask.
Oh my God. I hate that.
Terrifying, not fun.
Red Rum, I thought there's something kind of interesting hidden in the way that word is used, where it's like it's murder backwards, but it's also like violence and gore is addictive substance, and returning to this idea of addiction and alcoholism, which just, that's so many layers.
Yeah, that took me forever. Again, as a kid, I don't think I understood.
Same. Yeah, you don't register it until you're just ready, almost. There's also, obviously, anytime you bring a labyrinth in, you're playing with Minotaur imagery or references to the Minotaur myth, which, again, watch out for that in Saltburn. You'll know what I mean when you see it. I also noted it's interesting to me that Jack fails at Grady's mission, which seems like maybe not a great sign for this kind of mode of patriarchal family correction, that like it doesn't actually triumph in the end. It's the women and the children who prove the most capable and intelligent and able to navigate kind of the maze of the subconscious that is, or just The Shining.
The downfall of that ideal that like the man is the, maybe it was just that change in time.
Exactly. I had never noticed this in all the times I've watched this movie. If you keep the credits rolling through to the very end, you hear, after the music stops, the sounds of the party. You hear they like applaud the music, and then you hear a conversation and glasses clinking.
Just like keep it on, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like you're really being invited in at the end.
It's like who's next?
Yeah, like we are all also part of the party and have always been.
I've never made it to the
hotel.
I don't think I made it to the end, or I didn't hear that. I usually play credits all the way through.
I hadn't noticed that either. And I know I have so many more notes. I'm running way over time, so I'm trying trying to decide what the most important things to touch on are. I think the other thing that I really wanted to ask you about, or like plant in your head, this was kind of...
Oh, I hate when you do this.
This is...
Why, Siena? Why?
You must come to expect it from me at this point. Well, so I was thinking about, a lot of people cite when Grady comes and unlocks the freezer door, right?
Yeah.
To let Jack out, as kind of the moment that the movie decides that it's supernatural instead of real.
Yeah.
And that's like the moment where, it kind of, the denouement begins. And I was watching this time and I was like, that feels like that would be almost out of character for Kubrick and for the rest of the movies. There's something that I've been missing in this moment.
Yeah.
And
I couldn't remember if he opened it or not either.
I went back over and watched it multiple times.
What did you notice?
Well, I noticed, so here's what I'm wondering. Is the real world explanation, the alternative to it being that Grady unlocked it, that Wendy, we see her have trouble with the door lock the first time.
You think she didn't lock it?
I'm wondering, because the shot of her locking it is so fast, we hear something drop, but her hand is blocking it. We can't fully see what she's doing with the lock. And then when it's unlocked, we never see Grady on the other side of the door. We hear the sound of him unlocking
I was wondering that scene too, because again, rewatching it, it just... knowing that's not like a literal, it's a ghost story, but not a literal ghost story. Also the fact her struggling with that lock. I'm like, girl, you're about to die. Pick it up.
Yeah.
Pick it up.
Yeah.
You've been here before.
Yeah.
I was wondering that months. Too. Even when he's holding that little like door thing, when it's the iconic shot from underneath him. I'm like, even in that moment, did he get it open?
Yeah.
And he's just playing a psychological trick of like
it almost
waiting
feels
it out
like
for a minute. Like he was clearly just snacking and taking a nap. Yeah. Like was he just giving it a minute?
Give himself some nap time.
Yeah.
Well, and so I almost wonder if then it's like the implication is that Jack is hallucinating Grady unlocking the door and is taking this as this moment of like, the hotel is behind me. I am invincible. I, as like the patriarchal father figure, cannot be stopped. I can break through locked walls, locked doors. And in reality, what it is that she was frightened, missed the lock, and there's no ghost. It was just unlocked the whole time. And I'm wondering if maybe, to me, that's almost more interesting. If that possibility is left open, and the fact that we never see Grady unlock the bolts.
Again, in horror, if you don't see it,
you can't fully believe it.
Yeah.
So I have like 3 other pages of notes. I'll leave it at that for now.
I was gonna say we could put these. We'll definitely put these notes up. I think for
plenty
people to read.
Plenty for bonus Patreon content there. But
So
lest I take up
good.
all your misery time.
Misery's a little bit more simplistic, I think, with its themes and with its.
I also,
it's 2 people. It's also 2 people.
It's also 2 people, but I think they're also so in conversation and so like connected that it's like. I'm very glad that we did The Shining first because I think a lot of it like carries over into the conversation about Misery because they're playing with so many of the same ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So should we jump into Misery? Let me
lead us in.
Man, I was enjoying this though.
I need to take a sip of coffee after that.
Do you have any left?
I had exactly 1 sip. I was saving it for myself as a little treat.
You did good, Sienna. I'm proud of you.
Only talked for an hour and 15 minutes.
So I'll dive into Misery. So this was made 10 years after, or released 10 years after. I wrote down some of the taglines because I feel like they're very fitting considering this comes out on Christmas for those who celebrate. But one was, "This Christmas there will be misery."
Oh my God. Was it a Christmas release?
I believe so.
Aww,
yeah. So
how festive.
It fits. Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if it takes direct place, but you know, it's snowing, so therefore
they agreed with us that it had festive vibes.
Festive vibes.
Yeah.
Another tagline was, "Paul Sheldon used to write for a living. Now he writes to stay alive." I love taglines. Yeah. So the description of this, if you haven't seen it, is after a serious car crash, novelist Paul Sheldon, played by James Caan, is rescued by former nurse Annie Wilkes, played by Kathy Bates, who claims to be his biggest fan. Annie brings him to a remote cabin to recover, where her obsession takes a dark turn when she discovers Sheldon is killing off her favorite character in his novels.
Oh,
they make it sound so nice.
They really do.
This is one of those ones I have not read the novel.
Neither have I.
I think there's many.
Sorry, Twig.
Yeah, sorry, Twig. There's been many a time where I've wanted to read it, but again,
I've been like saving
I don't know if I can sit in that book.
I've not read a single Stephen King yet, and I know I'm gonna love him. I've just like. I don't know. I feel like I've been waiting.
I did that pretentious thing in high school where I think I pretended to read it.
Yeah.
So there's moments that I remember, but that was too much of a book to
read. I relate. Yeah. I've definitely like told people I've read Stephen King and haven't.
Yeah, I think we've all done that. Yeah. We've all done that. Yeah. Nobody get at us.
Yeah, or do.
Now I just realized, did I just say James Caan or Caan?
Caan, right?
Yeah.
It's Caan.
I do this to myself all the time. James Caan is Paul Sheldon. He's the dad in Elf, for those watching this season.
God, that's so funny. I was like trying to pinpoint what else I know him from.
I feel like that's the biggest one I've seen him in.
God damn it,
and then I haven't watched any of the Godfather films, but he's the voice of Sonny Carlson in all the Godfathers.
Oh, interesting.
I know him most notably from Misery.
Yeah.
Then we have
incredible performance too.
Yeah. We have Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes.
Mommy.
I know. So she's various characters in American Horror Story and one of my favorite seasons, which is Coven.
Yeah, she's incredible in Coven. I love her in Freak Show too. She's so good.
I think she's one of those actresses. Anything she touches is gold.
Yeah.
Even if everything around her is not the best, she's the best.
She's the best.
She also was in a film with Jack Nicholson. She was in About Schmidt, and then she's also in Titanic.
Yeah. Oh, funny.
She is in the TV series.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
6 Feet Under.
Oh, see, I haven't seen 6 Feet Under, but I was thinking, what's the thing that I remember Kathy Bates from the most? For me, it was the early 2000s adaptation of Annie, where she's the mean orphanage director.
Miss Hannigan?
Miss Hannigan, yes.
Oh, funny.
And she's
Why did I forget her in that?
So good.
Is Carol Burnett? Is she in the other?
That's
who
it's the
I
Carol
think.
Burnett role. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't realize she did. That's iconic.
It's not a great Annie, but she's great in it.
Again, it doesn't matter if everything around her.
Everything she touches is gold.
She's also in The Office, if you watch it. She's Jo Bennett.
God, she is. I forgot.
She's so funny. Just that southern boss with her
She's
two
literally
dogs.
everywhere.
She's such an icon.
She's everywhere.
She's also in the new Matlock.
Oh my God, Kathy Bates.
As Matlock. Which for
what an icon.
anyone that is younger than us, it was an old TV series that my parents used to make me watch on Sundays. So
that's so cute.
We have Lauren Bacall as Marcia.
What a get also, because I think Bacall at this point was like pretty reclusive and not doing a whole lot.
I was gonna say I tried to look up some of her. So The Big Sleep is the 1946 Big Sleep. And so then she, in the English dubbed version of Howl's Moving Castle, she was the Witch of the Waste.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
I forgot
which is
about
cool.
that. I love that.
I feel like that's a little bit more modern one. I have not seen that. We have Richard Farnsworth as Buster, who is my favorite character in this.
What an icon.
Again, coming off of like David Lynch stuff, he just reminds me of a character that we like perfectly injected in Twin Peaks.
Yeah, I could almost see him being like the buddy of the cowboy from Mulholland Drive too.
Oh, yeah.
So funny.
Mulholland Drive. We have Frances Sternhagen as Virginia and Graham Jarvis as Libby. Those are just a couple. Obviously, this is a smaller film, but there's some outside people that we see cut back and forth. And of course, we can't forget Misery the Pig as herself. She was the cutest pig.
I forgot about Misery the Pig, and and especially watching it, like rewatching it. There's so many pigs hidden throughout the set design of this movie. There's like her house is filled with pigs.
Well, also, if we want to talk filled with pigs, that last blow that takes her out is a pig, and it's Misery. You know what I mean? It's like this thing that, like, the thing that she's so obsessed with is the thing that kills her.
It's like that Bukowski quote: "You find the thing that you love, and you let it kill you."
Yeah. So yeah, just that like very visual representation of, well, there you go.
There you go.
We have.
I love that she calls her Mizzy too, as like the nickname.
Mizzy. The pig is so cute. So cute. Very much me coded.
Yeah.
not with the death, but you know. We have director Rob Reiner, which holy crap, man.
Again, everything he touches is gold, first of all.
I'm convinced. He directed one of my favorite movies of all time, which I actually thought was Christopher Guest is like one of the reasons I went to film school along with like Tim Burton and Wes Anderson. Those were like who I wanted to be.
They're very much in like the same like mental space for me, him and Christopher Guest. Yeah.
Rob Reiner?
Yeah.
How funny. Yeah. They kind of have, so he directed Spinal Tap, or This is Spinal Tap. Which was his directorial debut film. Which was
crazy.
He produced a ton of other stuff. He directed Stand By Me, Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, just to name a few. So yeah, iconic.
All 11 out of 10.
He I'll get to it later, but he also was one of the people involved in starting Castle Rock Entertainment that went on to do a bunch of really iconic films as well, which I'll get to. So it's based obviously on the novel Misery by Stephen King. It was produced by Rob Reiner and Andrew Scheinman. Why I always do this to myself. I gotta look up.
That sounds believable.
Thanks.
Yeah. And then, as the resident Jew, let me put the stamp of approval on that.
I just need to have a little. I gotta write phonetically next to these. My eyes ain't so good, and I can't see the screen from far away. We have the DP Barry Sodenfeld, which again did so many iconic things.
Oh my God, yeah, what's he done? I recognize that name.
Director of Men in Black 1, 2, and 3. Maybe the other ones, the newer ones too. We don't know. Didn't look.
Doesn't matter.
I picked out a few, and he directed Addams Family and Addams Family Values as well, and a bunch of other stuff. Like it really,
what I'm remembering it from.
They pulled in some really good people to make this.
Wow. Normally, DPs turned directors are not that good. Yeah. So that's pretty.
But most of my childhood was like these men.
Yeah. Damn.
Yeah.
You go, Barry Sonnenfeld.
Yeah. So now those, I love doing these deep dives because I'm like, oh, now I can pay attention.
Yeah.
So this was one of Rob Reiner's company's, Castle Rock Entertainment. first films. They also did Harry Met Sally and then a couple other ones prior.
Interesting.
But the fact that like I think the first 4 are pretty notable as well, or the first 2, and then obviously when Harry Met Sally, and then this became big. He also he named the small town appearing in his previous film Stand By Me. That's where Castle Rock. It's also a place in Colorado. It's also in the Stephen King universe.
Huh.
So there's a lot of
so
layers to Castle Rock entertainment.
Oh, and I hadn't realized that because of that he did multiple Stephen King adaptations too.
Multiple, yeah,
and considered good Stephen King adaptations.
Yeah. So so it was Castle Rock Entertainment also did The Shawshank Redemption, Dolores Claiborne and The Green Mile, just to name a few. So Castle Rock Entertainment is an American film and television production company founded in 1987. So just a few years before this. Again, that they got like 4 films out under it. This being I think the 4th. It was Rob Reiner, Martin Schaefer, Andrew Scheinman, Glenn Padnick, and Alan Horn. And it's a label off of like Warner Brothers Entertainment, and it's like a subsidiary of Warner Brothers Discovery as well. And it's again
the conglomerates.
I mean, they all kind of pile in there. Let's be honest. Nothing's original anymore. It's just a branch
every company
of the same
is like
tree
5
trunk.
companies now. Yeah.
So we talked about stats earlier, and I said like pay attention. You said it was 19 mil to make for Shining,
and like 47 grossed. Something like that.
and 47 gross. So this was set to produce at 14 million. And then it kind of ended up being 18 to 20 mil, which I feel like is kind of high.
That's pretty high
considering
for a 1 location film with 2 people in it and like very few special effects. That's kind of
it feels steep.
I feel like you could do that for like 4. Honestly,
I do too. Yeah, I was really
like
surprised
today,
to see that. I was like, is that 1 supposed to be there? Yes. So it grossed 10 mil in its first weekend, finishing second at the box office behind Home Alone.
Oh, stiff competition.
Well,
and especially in the holiday season too. That's
Yeah. But it ended up finishing at 61 million worldwide.
Oh, okay.
So it kind of crept up, I think, faster than Shining. But now I feel like Shining has.
It's gotten kind of the bigger reputation. Which I mean, it's also like I don't know if this is fair to say, but I think it's maybe more of an ambitious film. Like it's
Misery is?
The Shining.
Oh,
is.
Shining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
the story's bigger. There's a lot of layers.
Bigger,
there's a lot
the
of
world
themes.
is bigger. Yeah. Whereas Misery is so much about confinement in as small a space as possible instead of being stuck in this enormous emptiness.
Yeah.
So
I kind of have, and I'll jump to it later, but like one of my themes is just that, where it's like it's almost being trapped in one's body, and that's the horror of this versus the space.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I noticed from The Shining was this idea, especially where, we hear, I had forgotten that Tony lives in Danny's stomach. It kind of
he lives in his mouth, but when he gets scared, he
goes into his stomach. And it kind of like is like this sort of hint of this idea of like the hotel as body or the space as a human body that the characters are like Tony living in and crawling around in the stomach of. Anyway, sorry, continue.
I just think it's a funny time for this, talking about horror, how this is more of a psychological thriller. Totally. Same with Shining. And it's just funny
things slashers.
And just the landscape kind of when we talked about Scream and how at the time, like once we kind of go into 90s horror, it really is about having those like really hot actors that appeals to teens, and that's who the 90s was really appealing to when it came to horror.
Yeah.
And this film
this is more adult.
It's more adult. It was geared towards them with like the casting, I think the themes of it. But the fact that it did so well at the time, considering the horror that we were kind of going into. So good job, Misery. Real proud of you.
Applause for the pig.
Applause for the pig. Hold for the pig.
Hold for pig, please.
So Stephen King had originally planned to release the novel under a pseudonym, Richard Bachman. That's a pseudonym he used. But while writing it, he people kind of discovered that pseudonym. So he was like, okay, never mind. I'll just do this under Stephen King. But he then went back to it. But before he went back to it, he announced that Bachman had died from cancer of the pseudonym. So he was like, sorry, he died from cancer of the pseudonym. God. But then he brings him back to life. So he resurrected. He didn't die.
Much like Misery.
Much like Misery. And he used it in 1996 and 2007 again.
Such a goofball. I love him.
I know. What a little... Aww. Again, you got to think a dude just, much like his character, is just locked up writing things.
Oh,
I love that he made like a public announcement, like PSA. He died.
Cancer of the pseudonym.
They just, JK, he's back for 2 more times only.
That reminds me of. Do you watch Arrested Development?
Yeah.
When Maybe kills off her alter ego, Shirley from I think BS is the disease she goes with. Yeah.
I love it.
Oh, so good.
King had stated that Annie Wilkes was his favorite character he's ever written because he was always surprised by the unexpected depth and sympathy he had for her and that she had. So I think it's kind of interesting. You can kind of feel the love with this character. I think probably for those who've read the book, you can feel it.
I'm sure even more.
And then in the film, I think just Kathy Bates kind of brought that to it.
I wrote down a note saying, like, I just want to give her a hug. Like, it's...
At first.
Well, honestly, even as awful as she is, there's always a part of me that feels for her.
She's, again, we're talking about wardrobe and kind of the innocence. I think the way both these the female leads were dressed in these films are almost identical because they're both wearing that like denim
this
overall
like very
dress.
Like childlike.
Oh yeah, her hair with the little clips and the way it's parted. I mean, she's to a T a very like ignorance, but also very educated human being.
Yeah.
Stephen King was actually, I think probably because the love of this character, was reluctant to sell the rights to Misery at first because he was skeptical of how Hollywood studios would make the movie faithful to this. I think also
once shined, twice burned.
Yeah. I think having the PTSD from Shining, he was like, well, maybe I want to think a little bit more on this. However, he was impressed by the adaptation of his works in Stand By Me with Rob Reiner, so he agreed to sell Rob Reiner and Castle Rock the rights.
Interesting.
Can you guess how much he sold the rights to Rob Reiner for?
I have no idea.
$1. $1.
Oh,
he was just
Steven,
like, I really like what you did with Stand By Me,
sweet.
and I really trust you with this project. So, Stephen King.
That's a devoted author. I love that.
I know, isn't it? So he said, well, if Rob Reiner is either going to produce it or direct it, he has to have his name on it either as producer or director. I'll let him do it. And just let him option it for $1. I know. Which is a really like sweet, I think, start to why I think Rob Reiner has done so many adaptations, is because I think it was very...
They've got a good relationship.
They got a good relationship going. So I think that's really
something
cool.
Stanley could learn from.
I mean, is he at this point? Just let him be. When Stephen King finally saw the film, he was so excited that he was screaming at the screen. And Rob Reiner recalls him screaming, I'm just going to quote him, actually, I'm not even going to paraphrase. When we screened Misery for a large audience, he was like totally nuts. I mean, he would sit there and he goes, she's got a gun, she's got a gun. I mean, he would talk back to the screen. He wrote the book. He knows what's going to happen. He was jumping out of his seat just like everybody else.
That's so
Which is so, it's so cool. This is one of those films, and I'm going to ask, like, how many times have you watched this?
This was only, I think, my second watch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because I'd seen it when I was, I feel like this was definitely one my mom showed me. I would have been maybe 11 or 12 at the time.
Holy crap.
So it's been a while, but I remembered it
also
pretty
young for
vividly. I mean, again,
this one
my
gets
mom,
me.
my family, we go hard.
Yeah.
No, it scared me a lot at the time. Obviously, the like iconic ankle breaking scenes stayed in my memory really vividly, but also for whatever reason, like the image of him reaching for the hairpin on the floor and like trying to grasp at it, like the tension of those little shots really stuck in my memory very vividly.
Yeah.
So
this is the one I get Stephen King's reaction. This is one of the few films that I physically feel ill.
Oh my
watching.
God, yeah.
I scream. I put hoodie up and just.
I had to break it up. Like I couldn't watch it straight through. I had to go
wow.
like take a break and like get myself a snack and like calm
Yeah,
down.
like have a moment, be like, I'm not stuck at this.
How many times have you seen it?
Oh gosh,
More than The Shining.
More
right?
than The Shining. Not too much more. Probably like 8 or so times, I would say. Yeah, Shining's like
good
7,
handful.
6-ish. So yeah,
Cool.
this is weirdly like this one hurts me more to watch, but I like it more.
I mean,
like
again,
to feel
that's why
something.
That's why we like horror. It's pushing a bruise.
Yeah, this one feels very grounded in realism, and I think
Totally.
it has a lot to do with like Kathy Bates' performance, which Stephen King was really impressed by. So much so that he wrote his novel Dolores Claiborne and wrote it with Bates in mind. And so she ended up later starring in that film because of it.
Wow.
And then also he wrote a script for the TV miniseries The Stand in 1994. I'm unfamiliar with it. And his original novel featured a male lead, and he changed the name and made it a female lead so he could have Kathy Bates in it. That's how much he loved her.
I love that.
I know.
Oh,
I mean,
that's
she's
so cool.
brilliant. And at the time, too, they kind of called her like I'm going to put this again in air quotes, like a nobody compared to some of the other people I'm going to get to that we're going to be cast in this as well.
Fair.
And then a fun fact is Misery was almost turned into a Broadway play starring Julia Roberts.
No.
Exactly. That's why I say almost. And King immediately was like,
no.
And he vetoed it because in his words, Annie was a brawny woman who can sling a guy around, not a pixie.
No. She is a farm lass.
Which she does play a pixie in Hook. So this makes
a literal pixie.
A literal
pixie.
So I'm very happy to see.
I love Stephen King so much.
That's
so good.
However, apparently in 2015 it was made into a play, which if you do look up Misery, or a musical, if you look it up, there was the adaptation. It was starring Bruce Willis as Paul Sheldon and Laurie Metcalf as Annie Wilkes.
Interesting.
I haven't seen
better choice than Julia Roberts.
Yeah.
But
Bruce Willis though, which is interesting.
I could see that being very good casting. I mean, I had a note actually that because the setting is so tight and intimate, it feels almost like a stage play. Like it seems like it would suit itself well to adaptation.
Oh, totally. Yeah, this is really easily achievable in that setting.
Yeah, it's all very contained.
So do you want to hear who else was up for the role of Paul Sheldon? So obviously, famously, James Caan like kills, no pun intended, this role.
Okay, wait, question.
Yes.
Do you know how old he was when he filmed this?
This was the 90s. Everyone looked 45. Okay. I have no idea.
Because when they said that his character was 45, my jaw dropped.
Oh, was his character 45?
His character's 45.
Nailed it.
And I don't know if it's just because like I'm terrible at perceiving anybody's age, but I like thought he was like late 50s.
Every man, if you even look at Jack Nicholson, they all have receding hairlines at like 30. And they all just look, every 30-year-old. I mean, George Costanza on Seinfeld.
Aged.
He's supposed to be like 34 years old.
Insane.
I'm 34 years old. I don't
You
think
are
I
no
look like
George Costanza, my dear.
I mean, in mood and vibe, absolutely. Hopefully not in looks.
Oh
yeah, he was like 49
or 50.
50
Wow.
yeah.
Oh my God, he looks so much older to me.
I mean,
I don't know if that's just me, but
80s, 90s, I think then 2000s.
Hard on a man, apparently.
Hard on a man.
Oh my God. Bad old days.
So speaking of old men, I don't know, question mark, middle-aged men.
Love that segue.
Do you know anyone that was up for the role besides him?
I went in blind.
Oh, cool. So we got some fun ones, which I think it's like fun to think of the film in context of what it could have been. So according to the writer William Goldman, Richard Dreyfuss almost accepted the role, who I love as an actor.
He's really talented.
Because he regretted turning down the lead role in When Harry Met Sally, and he didn't want to make Rob Reiner disappointed in him again. But then he read the script and he's like, nope, too violent. I'm good.
And it's actually not even that violent. I mean, maybe that's just me.
I'm sorry, did we watch the same?
For a horror movie. Like there's violence, but there's very little blood.
Yeah.
There's very little blood.
Just a lot of, like, again, psychological.
Just a lot of mutilation.
Yeah. So he turned it down. Dustin Hoffman also turned down the role because he didn't want to be in a violent film.
Oh my god!
I think it's so funny because these men would have kind of killed.
Yeah.
There was also Jeff Daniels, Ed Harris,
so
Robert De Niro.
Oh, there you
Robert
go.
Redford, and Bill Murray.
Now
that's the one I'm holding on to. Jeff Daniels would have killed.
Oh, absolutely.
I think I would put him and honestly Richard Dreyfuss, I think, are two people that could have really sold this role. But Bill Murray wasn't really doing anything dramatic at the time.
Yeah, which to me that would have been fast. But I'm also like a sucker for a comedic actor in a dramatic role. So
yeah, they were all up for the role. We got Warren Beatty was also cast as Paul. And helped Rob do. He just helped Rob do a lot of the work on the script, and then eventually, I think it's later in my notes. I think he also bowed out because it was too violent.
After helping with the script.
I think he was like, you know what? I'm good. All these men,
sir, put your money where your mouth is.
Be a woman for a day. I'll show you violence.
We came for gore. Classic horror and modern gore.
Right? So those were kind of all the again, they spent some time, and then Rob Reiner obviously said, I couldn't picture anyone else doing this.
Rightly so.
Jack Nicholson was also offered the role, which is a funny thing, 10 years later, being offered another, because he didn't do anything Stephen King in between that time.
I don't think so. And I took notes. He has fairly few horror movies for such a horrifying human.
Yeah.
He's
he wasn't sure if he wanted to do this one because he was like, I don't know if I want to be in another Stephen King adaptation.
That's fair.
Again, being that typecast.
Yeah.
So James Caan actually got it after Jack Nicholson. So that final one of the final ones turned it down.
The charm. That's so funny.
Yeah, and then Jack Nicholson went on to do One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Right.
So
right. Yeah. Was was Kathy Bates always going to be? I just wanted to call her character Misery. Oh my God, what's her name? Annie. Was she always going to be Annie?
I'll get to her in a second. She went through. There's some heavy hitters. Also, I realized I just said Jack Nicholson went on to do One Flew Over. That came first.
I knew what you meant. That's fine. Time isn't real, as The Shining teaches us. We've always been the caretaker.
James Caan claimed he never read the film before doing this, too.
Whoa. So never read the book?
Oh, he never read the book. Never read the book before doing this.
Interesting. I mean, I guess I can see, as an actor, maybe you don't want to have your perception of the character tainted by a version of it that's not the one that's coming to the screen.
I think for the best, because these do... The film and the book have different themes. So I think even if he would have read the book, that character was going through the different things than the one in the film was going through.
That makes sense.
For the best, he had a day where James Caan came hungover, and they had to completely scrap that entire day of filming. But he was a good little buddy about it, and he ended up paying. He found out later that they had to do scrap everything, and so he paid for the entire day of the reshoot.
That's a good.
He was like, "Oopsies, I'm so sorry."
Good boy.
He also was super fidgety on set too. He didn't realize he was going to be in a bed for 15 weeks shooting.
Did he read the script or?
He didn't read anything. Actually, he didn't read the book. He didn't read the script. He barely read his contract.
He's like, I like to go in completely blind.
So Rob kind of used that to his advantage of getting that stress from the character, and was like, "This, use this, do this." So they kind of had to do a lot of, different takes on certain things because he just didn't want to be sitting there. But again, at the end, it kind of added to that.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
amazing.
Dude, it's called. Read the first few lines of the script.
Yeah.
I want to read this quote from Rob Reiner too. He goes, "You got the most neurotic guy in Hollywood, and putting him in bed after 15 weeks every morning. I don't know if you remember, he'd go, 'Today, Jimmy, you can get in that bed.'"
God. Love him calling him the most neurotic man in Hollywood too.
I haven't seen many interviews with with him, but I can kind of see. I could see him being an actor about things.
I could buy it. Yep.
Him and Kathy Bates didn't get along at the beginning of this film either. They had different rehearsal methods.
Oh,
so
interesting.
Kathy really wanted to rehearse her scenes and he didn't.
Interesting.
So they bumped heads a lot during that. But then after, like over the years, they've kind of very kindly given nice quotes about each other.
Oh, good. I'm glad they were able to come back around.
Yeah, they said it was, I think Kathy said it was one of the best film experiences she had working with someone. So
that's super cool.
she loved it. And
I mean, it shows in the work she does. That's
yeah.
Again, don't be shitty to your actors and you'll get great performances.
That's the thing too. Look at this. This woman was not tortured, did not have to do 127 takes, and absolutely
fucking
demolished this role.
It's almost like that's their job.
Oh my God. Acting? You want an actor to act? In what world? So
maybe my mentor should have spent a little more time teaching Stanley about improv.
So Kathy Bates, who was up for the role, we have, I mean, we could stop on every single one of these icons. Jessica Lange.
Oh, she would have been
also
fabulous.
American Horror Stories.
Yeah.
That's all I know her from, if I'm being honest.
I know her from her Broadway days a little bit.
Yeah. She's, again, someone who, no matter what the project, kills the role.
So talented.
Barbara Streisand.
Hate that.
Don't think she would do good.
No.
Bette Midler. Yes.
I would find it funny, but I would love it.
Oh, Bette Midler?
Yeah.
I think she has she could convey the innocence, and then that some of those scenes where she flips, I could see her face. She turned it down because she, again, like these men thought it was too violent and later called herself stupid.
I mean,
stupid for turning this down.
It is a stupid project to turn down. You take this project.
Yeah. Stephen, I was going to say coming off The Shining. By then it's
been 10 years. You've had enough time to realize.
What did he write? 50 more books in that time?
It has come out in that time. Like a lot of his more famous novels have come out.
The fact that some of his first few were so
big.
So big.
Yeah. To have come right out the gate with Carrie and then Salem's Lot and then The Shining is just...
That must be
the king. He's the king.
He's the king.
Yeah.
Angelica Houston was also offered the role.
Oh, interesting.
She was interested, but she couldn't commit because she was doing The Grifters that came out in 1990 at the time.
Interesting. Well, and she was, I don't know if still at this point, but she was dating Jack Nicholson for a very long time.
Oh.
So some fun crossover there.
Jack Nicholson just pops up everywhere.
He sure does. His creepy little face.
With those eyebrows. The screenwriter, William Goldman, suggested Kathy Bates to Rob Reiner, and they kind of ended up saying, like, oh, she was our first and only choice. I'm like, I don't believe that. You went through all these other people, but she was the best choice.
She was the right choice.
She was quoted, I kind of watched some interviews with her in 1990, kind of like seeing what she thought about the film. And she said it was a fantasy to play this role ever since she read the book. Aww. A friend ended up giving her a copy in New York. It was like, you have to read this, and if they ever make a movie out of it, you have to play Annie. So bless her friend. Yeah. Too. And so she was like beyond stoked. Again, you talk about like you can tell her love for the character. It's because she really wanted this role.
So cool.
Which I think a lot of those roles need it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think especially because this is a character who you need to have that empathy for. If it's being played by somebody who doesn't really love that character and see the humanity in that character, it could become very one-dimensional.
Totally. There's not that shift. I think probably King's idea of like Jack and not having that shift. It's like, imagine if we started off the gate with Annie being someone that we immediately are like, something's off with her. So Kathy Bates took inspiration from real life criminals, including Ted Bundy, and then read books on kids who had trouble bonding with people as children.
Interesting.
Which makes sense why her character feels so grounded in innocence, stuck in that innocence. Even the shot with her bedroom, she has like a big bottle of Coke, like a 2-liter bottle. Yeah. She's eating, she's like watching TV shows.
It's like a little kid wose mom's gone for the night. Yeah. That's so interesting.
I think that's why her character, and again, I'm sure all of this is like talked a little bit more about in the book, but the idea of once he gets to that scrapbook scene and he's flipping through, all these like infant deaths. Yeah. I think she's clearly working through these, childhood traumas that she's still, and even just being the caretaker that she never had clearly growing up. So
that was so fascinating to me because I know that that's like a thing that there are true crime cases where there have been like killer nurses, but I don't know if any of them, or at least any of the ones that really kind of like popularized this idea of this kind of crime had actually happened at this point. So I'm very curious which came first, whether it was based on a real life case or whether Misery came out and then some of these real life cases came to the
sure
surface.
some of it existed.
I'm sure.
If you want a good podcast to listen to about kind of malpractice,
Ooh.
not so much like I mean, I guess the debate is intentional or not. Dr. Death?
I've heard of this. I haven't listened to it yet.
If you, I mean, not for the weak. As someone who's had, like, I've broken my back, and there's a lot of, he was like a spinal surgeon. That's like mainly what he did. And then just hearing the victims of this malpractice talk. And then I know they made it into a Hulu show, I believe, too, with Joshua Jackson is the lead in it. He's the Dr. Death. So yeah, it's kind of, it's so interesting to kind of pull apart and break apart her character, just with those little like kind of hints sprinkled through. And again, talking about casting, I don't. There's some people like Jessica Lange, I don't think could pull it off. Barbara Streisand, I don't think could pull it off. No. I think you need that level of innocence in it that Kathy Bates is just the only person I can see as Misery as Annie.
Yeah, there's a warmth to her that I think it would be hard for somebody like Barbara Streisand to get across in the same way.
Like I couldn't do that. I don't have the innocence.
No, neither of us do. We're horror fans.
So Misery takes place in the fictional town Sidewinder, Colorado, near the Overlook Hotel. And I had said earlier, there's that excerpt from page 211 in the book that kind of talks about this New York magazine that came to write about the hotel burning down. So we know that these live in the same world.
I love that.
They don't happen at the same time.
Great.
I know some people, some people talk about how that snowstorm, the fact that like both these places have that big snowstorm come through, if those happen simultaneously. But
it's a good question.
But yeah, if this burned down 10 years, they didn't. But you know, you can let it's
your
world.
Your imagination run wild. Yeah.
Majority of the scenes were filmed on set, but for the snowy exterior scenes, they did shot in Nevada and Northern California were the two places they shot.
Interesting.
And then this was the very first film to be released on New Line Home Video exclusively through the Nelson Entertainment, which they were a co-producer on this project. Castle Rock and Nelson Entertainment. If you look on IMDb, they kind of have like a long history of working together.
Cool.
And although New Line existed as a studio since the 1960s, they never really had a home video unit until the release of this movie, with almost all of their movies being distributed by RCA Columbia Pictures Home Video. So this is the kind of first, which I think like they're like, Misery. This is a good one.
It's a good one to start with. Yeah, good call on their part.
The car accident scene was captured with a setup involving 9 cameras, which I thought was really fun. That's just a random fact for production.
That's
which is probably where some of the budget went. Is what I'm realizing.
I think you're. I think you're right there.
So the book versus the film. Again, as someone who's not read the book and only just dabbled my toe on TikTok into other people's read the book, there's some key theme differences in the two of them. I think addiction is one that's obviously in both.
For sure.
Way more so the book than the film. I don't even think they really nod to it.
I think
at all in the film, or at least we're not given that context in the beginning.
I think the only note I had about it, because I'd seen, because I watched it on Amazon, you know, there's that like the thing that pops up on the side that has like fun facts about the movie.
I forgot that they do that.
Yeah, they something popped up on there, and I was trying not to read too much of it, but I accidentally saw one.
I forgot that it does that.
And it said a little bit about how much this was inspired by King's relationship to substances.
Oh yeah.
And I think the opening shot, because I just wrote down here, so clearly about substances from the opening shot, and I'm trying to remember what the opening shot is. I think it's of a cigarette being lit, which feels to me like kind of the closest we get to
addiction.
To kind of like openly addressing that. I think apart from that, it's all kind of
real light
subtext. Yeah.
So
interesting.
Obviously, King kind of, this was
Yeah.
writing the book. It was a lot about a commentary on his own addiction. There's a lot more backstory, and I guess Paul Sheldon's character in this has recently gotten himself back on track from his alcohol addiction was the big one for him.
Much like Jack Torrance and the irreparable harm that his 5 months on the wagon have caused him.
Yep. So he kind of thinking it in that context. So he had this alcohol addiction. He then is being held captive in a lot of pain, and then being given those Norville pills as well. So it kind of kicks back his addiction. So not only with substances, but
interesting. I didn't even think about that.
I think also the addiction and like the idea of control, I think as well are big themes in the book, and and then obviously the film is really more about, I think, control. Rob Reiner is quoted saying, "It was important for me to find my way into the film. And as you will see, the movie is really about a man who's trapped by his own success and is desperately trying to break out and establish himself in a different way. I felt very much those feelings when I finished All in the Family, which is a TV series he worked on." So it was kind of nice that King trusted him, I think, to go a different route. And then he really took something from like his personal life, like as a creator, as someone who, has kind of been in this success or like been in this arena. How would I, like, what are the notes that this character can take from me, kind of thing?
I love that. I also I hadn't thought to look this up beforehand, but as you were talking, I got curious and I was like, what is Norval? Just looked it up. It's a benzodiazepine, and it's used for treating acute alcoholism.
Oh my gosh, really?
Preoperative apprehension and anxiety. And it's also used as a sedative and hypnotic medication. So really interesting.
That's kind of a nice nod.
Right?
Yeah, that was probably his like direct nod to like, I'm not gonna do this, but here's some context.
Here's some, yeah.
I thought it was a made up drug.
So did I, because I'd never heard of it before, and I was like, is that a thing? So yeah,
that's so funny.
That really kind of like adds another. Interesting also, because at the beginning of The Shining, there's a reference to auto-hypnosis. So there's like kind of an interesting hypnosis
King really runs deep with his themes.
He loves that, yeah. Loves a good hypnotism.
So yeah, Rob Reiner kind of took away what he wanted from that script. So the film is more about like control. I think just addiction to like almost writing itself, I think, too.
I was thinking about that too.
Yeah, because again, he's really combative and really is trying to, but again, I think that just falls under the umbrella of control. Yeah. Both for him and Annie.
Yeah, and totally.
Then the idea of like misery is survival, like life is pain kind of theme.
Love it.
Which goes real dark. But those are the kind of two that I've pulled, I've looked up, and those were kind of extracted.
Oh, I love that.
Because Annie as herself, just if one thing doesn't go her way, that's her breaking
the flip point. Yeah, that's so interesting. It's I'm trying to look because I had a note about that, but keep talking and I'll find it.
I just want to jump into which I could talk on the theme of just Annie's control
oh my god,
for forever.
Yeah, there's so much there.
So I have some cool production details before I kind of jump into my watching notes.
Please.
So the black and white photo sitting by the bunk phone in Annie's living room is actually an old photo of preteen Kathy Bates. So she snuck in some photos of her.
That's so cute.
We have a photograph of young Paul Sheldon shaking hands with Queen Elizabeth II, which could be seen above Annie Wilkes' shelf in Misery. Of the Misery novels, and it's actually a real photograph of James Caan meeting the Queen.
Oh, damn.
He was at the royal film premiere of Funny Lady in 1975.
Oh, funny.
And so he got to meet her, and so they stuck that photo in as well.
Love it.
Annie displays some traits associated with the array of mental illnesses, as we know, like bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, Munchausen's syndrome by proxy.
Totally, yeah. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
And in a special feature on the collector's edition DVD, a forensic psychologist described Annie as a virtual catalog of mental illness. So again, I think, the idea of control and OCD and things, but I think you can really break her character down from a bunch of different aspects.
Sorry, go ahead.
No.
It feels very much like she like Annie and Paul are two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely.
You know, like she is almost the side of him that writes the misery books, which is something that he's trying to reject and push back into the past and into the closet, and that keeps like returning. And
well, she's stuck in that time, much like those books and that idea of misery are keeping him stuck there. And so she represents this like innocence at probably the beginning of his career when he was super excited, and coming on that other other side of the coin, like you said, is him trying to get away from that. And I think also her inability to get past, like, even the word she uses, she just is capped at a certain age too.
I
So
mean,
the idea
even
of change.
yeah, even in her refusal to swear. So yeah,
Until she does swear.
Also, just Kathy Bates's delivery of the like Mr. Man.
Mr. Man is my favorite.
I'm obsessed.
Mr. Man.
Mr. Man. It's
she does say "Oh, Paul" 12 times in this film too. So if you want to play a little counter game,
drinking game,
yeah, a little drinking game if you drink. Although this is
that's maybe a little too much for a drinking
too
game.
on the nose for a drink. Make sure it's like a beer or something real light.
Yeah, or a sip instead of a
or hot
full
cocoa,
because there you go. Cute. I like that.
For the scene where James Caan has to crawl out of bed, the DP Barry Sonnenfeld actually spit on the hardwood as a marker. And James Caan said this was the first movie in whichever he had to work where someone hawked a loogie for marks instead of putting tape down.
Hot.
I don't know if they just were real scarce with tape that day.
That's so funny. Surely there was something
horror.
better to use than spit. Come on.
I don't know, a pen, a shoe, I don't know, there's a shoelace, a water bottle.
We could go on. A misery
a clapper,
book.
A misery book. Spit? Spit's all you got. Okay.
That was,
he had a rough time on set that day. Maybe it was the day after he was hungover and they had to do the reshoot, so he was like, this is your karma.
Yeah. This was the comeuppance.
Another little like fun fact is the theme music in one of the trailers for this film was actually a piece from James Homer's score from Aliens, which I think has been used in other trailers before.
Interesting. I mean, it's a very effective score.
Yeah, so that's just, if you find an old trailer, you might hear that and be like, is that from? Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Did you find your little note?
I didn't. I'm so sorry. Continue. I have other notes, but I'll get to those as they come up.
So some of the cinematography points. Rob Reiner studied Alfred Hitchcock movies to figure out how to shoot a thriller, because again, the films he's done previously weren't really in that much like Kubrick.
Yeah,
he kind of did a little bit of everything else, which again adds to that element that me and you like, where directors have never done horror before.
Coming to the genre fresh.
Yeah.
There's, I think, a little bit less maybe reliance on tropes.
Think. James Caan called Reiner out, and one day on set, he asked him, like, who do you think you are, Alfred Hitchcock? And he's like, well, kind of, because I've been watching a lot of those
what films. I want to be.
That'd be great. The use of lighting in this, too, I thought was really interesting.
Good, yeah.
Kind of the dimly lit scenes, I think, almost like act as jump scares. I think having these really dark, seeing the darker side of Annie, I think it's this very nice visual representation of the side of her that we're not going to see during the day because she likes to hide it.
Yeah.
Even the first day, she gets really depressed. It's raining and she kind of just stares off, and we're like, oh wow, there's that bipolar element of it.
Yeah.
There's this other side of her. So I thought the use of lighting in this, I paid attention to a little bit more. And just the shots and the framing, kind of Kubrick-esque, I feel like. And those straight-on shots with the door frame, and they're very symmetrical. A lot of the push-in shots I found really interesting.
A lot of it is also shot from a low angle looking up, too, which adds to this impression of her kind of towering over the camera.
Yeah, and we were talking about POV, too, of the camera and kind of being in Paul Sheldon's place in that bed, and kind of, no matter how nice someone is you have that uneven playing field of someone having someone having the high ground. So I kind of noticed that a little bit more. It's a simpler film than Kubrick's Shining, but I think it has a lot of those. Again, not being a horror director, I think there was a lot of like film lovery kind of things in this.
Totally. Yeah, you could tell that it's somebody who's like getting to play in a genre playground he doesn't usually. And he's like, oh, and there's this, and there's this, and there's this.
Yeah, telling it from a different perspective, I think, is what makes some of these, first-time horror directors' films so iconic.
Totally, yeah.
They have that advantage where they haven't been oversaturated of watching too many
there's a
horror
freshness,
films,
yeah.
like us.
Yeah.
So kind of my notes on the film, I just thought the quietness of the opening was so interesting, and even just the him singing along happily in the car and then getting into that car crash, and we're first introduced to Annie as this, again, brute woman that just slings this man so casually over, and it kind of sets you up for like, oh shit. I think we see a lot of horror movies where we see the brute strength of someone from the beginning, but then to like wake up and have that shot where she's just there
standing,
but so innocent. So I think that parallel was really interesting.
It's so creepy. Well, and it's also, I think, all in so many ways, she just continues to feel like a manifestation of the worst sides of writing, almost. It's like I almost see her as like his own writer's block and self-doubt coming to like haunt him, and his like writer's conscience.
Is he making the right choice? Stepping away? Is this like because sometimes too, I think it's a really interesting thing to watch nowadays with like toxic fandom. I think within like,
I was thinking about that so much.
I've never thought about it in that context
before, interesting.
but like being a part of those, like I'm a huge Marvel fan, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I think not only being like a woman in that space, but I think someone who just enjoys knowing the fact that like the person's writing it is the one that's writing it.
Right.
I could write, we'll all write something different. Like we all as fans want the thing that we want, but like that's what fan fiction's for.
And so often when we get fan service, it's not fully satisfying the way we expect it.
And that's the thing too, we also don't want that. I remember even the debate, and I'm going to go on a tangent, of Star Wars and Kylo Ren and Rey, and it's just like, we kind of got the ending that everyone was asking for. We got Reylo, and everyone hated it.
Yeah.
I've never watched the third one again, and Kylo Ren's my favorite character. So it's like,
because it feels like it's coming from the audience instead of the author.
Yeah, it's like so it is interesting with that element nowadays.
Totally.
On this, it's still so. It's more. I don't know if I tried to look up when toxic fandom became a thing.
That's a great question.
Couldn't really find an answer.
I mean, I imagine a lot of it was people like Stephen King and like George, like people who created lots of like very extensive literary worlds that then people dive into. But
that's why fan fiction exists. People
exactly.
Just go online.
Yeah, there's a space for it. It's just maybe not in the adaptation process.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, the setup of her, I think the idea of like her voice being so sweet, that just goes back to Kathy Bates.
Well, and she has like a very almost girlish face too. With like
she looks super baby face.
Yeah, so young. Which like it's also something that I've always been kind of heartbroken by, is I feel like Kathy Bates is often cast as characters who are like canonically ugly, quote unquote. Like there's a lot made of like the unappealingness of her, and I'm like, I think she's beautiful. Like I don't get it.
I didn't really dive into it, but that was a theme that people talked about online as well, is kind of the idea of like gender in horror too, and kind of if you're gonna have these female leads
on that.
Yeah. So that absolutely plays into it, is that she's kind of this like frumpy, youthful, not, of course at the time they're gonna be like, she's overweight.
Right.
Is she? Absolutely not. For Hollywood, perhaps. At the time.
She's a normal human weight.
She's a normal person. So yeah, I think just this film, like every time I rewatch it and now knowing who would have been cast, I think
that's so
it's just
interesting.
it's so fun. I'm just gonna go through some of my favorite moments of the film. The reveal of his legs and the prosthetics or just special effects makeup they did on that. I think again going to the theme of where Shining is the place and the place is the body here, because yes, there's a winter storm and yes, there's all these things, but like he could have escaped if he was able-bodied, at this moment.
It's like in The Shining, the thing that is trapping you is the hotel, and here it is the body.
And I guess maybe the mind too.
Yeah.
So I guess they're both a little internal.
Yeah. Interesting.
I just realized that now. Look at me go.
Oh, I love the crossovers.
But yeah, I think this movie makes me so sick because spatial things don't freak me out as much as films where it's your own body that is kind of the villain for you too.
Which is very, very Rear Window, which is something else that I was thinking about as I was watching this time, especially once he's in the wheelchair. There's so much there that is so clearly a Rear Window reference.
Yeah. Oh.
Just like
that makes
the
sense.
main character with two broken legs who is watching through the window to try and unravel this plot as the clock ticks down on whether or not he will unravel it or it will unravel him. Type of setup.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
With the talk of the legs, another major difference, much like The Shining exploding and now Jack freezing, it wasn't actually a hobbling scene in the book.
Oh my God, that's so interesting because it's so like farm animal centric, which like feels really like, I would have assumed that was like one of the most direct adaptations.
No. They thought so in the book it's actually an axe and a blowtorch. They cut off the feet and then like cauterize it so he doesn't bleed out, and so he doesn't have feet at the end of it. But I weirdly think
I think this is a better choice.
Of the legs
is so much more horrifying. I think
so much more horrifying.
I think it goes to the idea that we've touched on of like it's more horrifying to see kinds of injuries that you can picture happening to yourself. And it's much easier to picture.
You know that pain. Most people know.
Most people have broken a bone.
How many people have cut off a limb with an axe?
And then had it cauterized with a blowtorch. Like, so, it's harder to picture that. Whereas, like, the idea of somebody breaking your bone where it's already broken is like, I can feel it.
Yeah.
I can feel it too clearly.
Oh, yeah. This is the part in the film where I'm just like, no. And I do it every time. I'm like, I love it, but I don't. I love it, but I don't. They actually thought this was the more PG version. So they're wrong. This is awful.
Yeah.
This is probably my least favorite scene in a horror movie.
It's one of the most uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah. And you know he's like still really and just the look on his face. Oh God, he really kind of emotes perfectly, and just then the disassociation I think that comes with the rest of it.
It's that like he's a changed man from that point on, and you see it in his eyes, which is just it's such incredible performance.
Yeah, it hurts.
It
hurts.
I think it also goes back to something we've talked about of like, I think it's so often. Pain is more effective on screen in creating fear for me in horror than death. Like there's what, 2 deaths in each of these movies?
Oh, same way too. Do you notice they both get just the funny, the sweet,
you're right.
helpful man just gets but like their chest.
That's super interesting because in the original Halloran, in The Shining, the original Halloran survives and rescues them.
Oh.
And Kubrick's the one who killed them off.
I always forget that he doesn't. Both of them, actually. I think I just love those characters. Specifically Buster.
I know.
Bless him.
I love him.
Him and his wife's chemistry, too.
Yeah.
Buster's my favorite part. One of my favorite parts of this.
I think also the setup of the house and where the staircase is placed and kind of the role the staircase has in the narrative reminds me a little bit of the house from George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which as they're trapped in there and kind of moving between the different levels in the basement, kind of the way they navigate that space. There's something similar to the navigation of the space in Misery.
I have to rewatch that. I didn't make that comparison.
So good. That's one we should do on the podcast for sure.
Yeah.
It's really, really good.
Love Romero.
Yes. So talented.
Yeah, I thought interesting too, as the film goes along, we're obviously very confined in the space of the bedroom and we get more and more freedom as it goes on. So we see a lot more of the sets. I think the framing even gets a little bit wider and stuff. So we're able to pull in a lot more details, but still the idea of like, no matter how close escape seems, again, still the idea
it's
of
always
being
just out of reach.
Yeah.
Just like that bobby pin.
Yeah. Or again, be boxed in with the idea of like Misery, the the novels and not wanting to or trying to break out of that. Like no matter how much like freedom he technically has, he still very much feels kind of trapped by all those elements around him.
Okay, let's talk about Misery the novels because I have thoughts.
The covers. The romance novels.
It's so interesting to me that in this like clear author insert character, the Stephen King stand-in is not a horror writer, he's a romance writer. Which is I got thinking a lot about this because one of my favorite essays from film school is by this awesome theorist named Linda Williams, and she talks about what she defines as body genres. And she lists 3 body genres. There's horror movies, there's weepies, like melodramas, and softcore porn. And her idea is that these 3 kinds of films are all about bodily fluids. They're about like blood and tears and cum. And also that they are all 3 associated with the feminine in ways that are seen as demeaning. That they are like these bodily low female things. And that because of that, they're able to touch on pieces of human and especially feminine experience that other things can't. And so I was thinking about that with the choice for him to be writing these essentially literary weepies that are like these extremely feminine, extremely flowery. Like we know it's all about which suitor she's going to choose and her baby and all of this stuff. It's like there's something about that just it feels like there is a lot of disdain from James Caan's character towards the femininity of his own writing and also towards the femininity of his fan base in particular, where like he hates that this is who reads his books and he hates that it's people who listen to like Pavarotti and like this very like foofy music. Like he hates that that's what he's associated with.
And then he's confronted right with it.
He's faced with it, and that like there is a parallel between that and horror. That I also think those of us who are femmes who are fascinated with horror, there's like a kinship there that's really interesting between the like extremely feminine and the extremely grotesque. So I don't know. I got on a whole Linda Williams tangent there.
I love that. No, that's really interesting to break those up in those 3. Was that something that she wrote a thesis on?
And she I can send it to you. That's where she coins like the term body genre, which is something that I think about like all the time. Like horror is a body genre. Because it is. It's all about the things that the body goes through
again, like mental, I think plays into that too. So
whether it's physical or psychological, it's
still
body centric. And that there's something
the reaction
feminine about that. We think of like the brain is masculine and the body is feminine.
Also, what's that quote in like Fleabag that women are inherently born with pain and men seek it out? And I think
men have to go out into the world to find it.
That's why I think a lot of horror that comes from women or self-identifying women, I think versus like the typical like cis man is so
powerful.
And then we experience, I think even in watching those, depending on you know who you are, you can kind of see or relate to the other. So that's really interesting.
So I'll send you my Linda Williams after this. She's an OG.
So speaking of women in horror, in 1991, Kathy Bates became the first woman to win an Oscar for Best Actress in a horror or thriller film.
Kathy, that's so good. Wait, was this before? Silence of the Lambs was 92, I think. So this was before Silence of the Lambs.
Yes. So we have Frederick March was nominated for or won an Oscar for his performance in Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, 1931. Then we have Ruth Gordon for Mia Farrow in
Rosemary's Baby.
Mia Farrow in Rosemary's Baby. That's not the character's name. I wrote that backwards for myself. So she was Best Actress in a Supporting Role. We have Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster for Best Actor and Best Actress in Silence of the Lambs. That was 1991.
Oh,
so that was a year after.
Cool.
And then we have Natalie Portman as Best Actress in Black Swan, which
so
I
deserved.
completely forgot about. Yeah, so good.
Deserved.
But it was kind of cool that Kathy Bates, again, as a role, not only Stephen King's favorite, Kathy Bates really wanted to play her. And I think she's just become, Annie Wilkes is ranked the 17th most iconic villain in an American Film Institute list of 100 heroes and villains. So I think just the universe kind of knows this character.
Everybody bows down before Kathy Bates, and we are about
Annie.
it.
And Annie was always intended in the novel to be an amalgam of Stephen King's scariest fan. So I think that's why he also had a lot of fun, because your imagination can run wild. And he's like, well, I hope she doesn't exist, but I'm going to write her so none of you do this. It is a warning to all of you.
Do not take this as an invitation.
Yeah, so that's kind of my wrap up. I have some like little Easter eggs and stuff. So
please, give me an Easter egg.
You want an Easter egg? Okay, I'll give you a couple. So a video of When Harry Met Sally was actually visible in the general store. So that's in the back again.
Reiner.
Directors who love to put little things in. During the scrapbook scene, if you pause on some of the news articles, it mostly consists of one or two paragraphs that are continuously repeated. So much
that's
like
terrifying. I love that.
At like 21 minutes, there's a POV approach shot, and it goes like past Buster on the side of the road, which turns to reveal Annie driving. And it was designed by the film's cinematographer. So that little which I think is a really iconic shot. So, when we see Buster and stuff passing, which there's a lot of moments in that film that I'm like, oh my God, you're just missing it.
Near misses. Yeah.
At 50 minutes, you'll see a signed photo that's actually director Rob Reiner's handwriting. Aww. So he did some of the little props on there.
So cute.
And
truly putting his touch on every frame of the film.
And he pops in. I'll just give you a last one. I have a lot of these. Rob Reiner pops in. He is the helicopter pilot.
Oh my God.
This one too. So he's like, not only
that's so cute.
He was having a great time.
Oh my God, I love that. I'll give you one little Easter egg, because I saved them. But if you watch back Jack's interview scene with Ullman in The Shining, look at the desk. There's a cup on the desk. Inside the cup is a bunch of pens and a tiny little metal axe replica.
Shut up.
That they put in there as a little Easter egg.
Did you find that, or did you see that?
I read about that.
I was like,
you
watching the film with a magnifying glass.
Honestly, but people have. And then this isn't really an Easter egg, but I just love the ironic use of a freeze frame at the end as Jack's freezing.
Oh my God, so bad. The ultimate freeze frame?
The ultimate freeze frame.
A brain freeze, if you will.
And on the note of brain freezes, I think if we talk for any longer about Stephen King, we are going to drive ourselves into a state of cabin fever. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, everybody. Happy whatever holidays you celebrate around the time that the year ends.
Yeah. Or if you don't celebrate anything, happy day.
Happy nothing. And we are going to be back in the new year. Are we going to tease what we're
I think we always
about?
tease.
Yeah, let's tease. So we actually mentioned one of the films we're going to be talking about earlier in
Speaking
here.
of Easter eggs.
Little Easter egg within the episode. We're going to be doing a Rear Window Disturbia pairing.
Yes.
For
the same film, but
different. The same film, yeah. Same film, different execution.
Yes.
So look forward to that and all of the terrifying voyeurism that comes with that pairing. And thank you all for listening to Splice and Splatter. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Splice and Splatter Pod to stay in touch and see what we're up to, suggest films we should be talking about. The podcast is a High Garden Entertainment production presented by the Jean Cocteau Cinema, owned by author George R.R. Martin here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's the part I left out of the intro. George. Yikes. You can find out more about the Jean Cocteau online at jeancocteaucinema.com or on Instagram at Jean Cocteau Cinema. A special thank you to our amazing producer, Warren Langford. We're so grateful for you and your patience.
Thank you.
To Travis Fowler, the man behind the camera. To Theo Schaefer, our amazing composer. Until then, this has been Splice and Splatter with your hosts,
Al
and Siena. And we'll see you next time for more horror and gore.
Bye.
We'll be right back.